Hello again, friends, and you are my friends, and welcome to another edition of 605, the Superpodcast, the only podcast on Turner Time, the Mothership, the best wrestling podcast on the planet, the only wrestling podcast that matters, the most influential wrestling podcast. Call somebody. I'm your host, the great Brian Last.
It's me!
The hardest working man in wrestling podcast.
Baby, baby.
You know, someone recently called me the Weapon X of wrestling historians, which may be the greatest compliment I've ever received in my life. And I'm very happy to welcome back to the co-host chair someone who hasn't been in it in way too long and unfortunately will only be in it way too briefly today. But that is your friend and mine, Jimmy Cyclone, Rockin' Jerry Brown. He has more names that make me smile than anyone else in wrestling history. And that is your friend and mine, Vandal Drummond himself, Kurt Brown. Kurt, welcome back to the show.
Hare Krishna, may Yolanka the space deity bless you with her gender-shifting and pacifying gun. Yes, baby. How are you tonight?
You know, it really makes me realize how much I miss you when we open the show like that.
I miss you guys, too. You are as has been stated previously, you are the Weapon X of wrestling historian, and that's proper. And the reason is because the 605 Superpodcast is art. And the true definition of art is complete annihilation of the soul. And that is exactly what this show does. For the wrestling history to be told, kayfabe must die first. You have annihilated. You did the last step. History is being written.
I love having you on the fucking show. But let me say, I did say, unfortunately, that you would be with us briefly today, and then it really has nothing to do with you. I've been trying to get you on the show again for a little while. Unfortunately, Kurt retired and then became busy. I don't know how that worked, but as Kurt, I'm sure will tell you, Kurt's been doing a lot of things, traveling around, also doing a lot of work, so he will be on the show more regularly soon, but Kurt's been just very busy, right, Kurt?
I have been had that vacation. I'm a domestic bitch now. I cook, I clean, I do all that stuff, and I'm having a great time. But likewise, I have missed you and the Super 5 podcast.
The Super 5 podcast. Yes.
Arose by any other name, if it's a Pod 605 Cad Post, I have missed that too. So. And just want to do a note to all the 605 folks that I communicate with. I know I haven't been quick getting back to people, and I want to apologize. Our desktop gave the ghost recently, and so all I have is my phone. But in a few days, we should have a new desktop up and running, and my fingers will fly a lot more freely.
well, I can't wait to have your fingers flying freely more often here on the program. But
yeah, I never realized, before I just said it, I never realized that freely is a 6-syllable word.
Well, I guess either did I, but I said briefly you'd be with us, and the reason is this wasn't the original intention for this show. This show was primarily done. What was originally going to be episode 89, Scott Cornish in the co-host chair. We did an entire top 10 with all your favorite top 10 characters. And then in production, the last couple of days, actually, I realized I wasn't pleased with the way everything came out. It wasn't what I thought was appropriate to be released. I thought we could do better. I thought I could do better. So I have scrapped that entire episode. I've said that all of that will not be released, and we're going to do this instead. Kurt, you're going to be here. I'm going to take most of the original segments that were going to be on that show. We'll use them here. The Tim Hornbaker segment that was originally going to be on episode 90, I'm moving it up. It's going to be here in episode 89. So for all of you who hear me on the Jim Cornette Experience this week as this show comes out, announcing what episode 90 will be, it won't be that anymore, because the Tim Hornbaker segment will now be on this episode, but that's where we're at. So a couple other notes regarding that. As the Easter egg for today, I'm going to include a little bit of me and Scott from that original episode talking about some music stuff that I found funny. Check that out as the Easter egg. And also Ramsor Records, of course, the sponsor, of the top 10. We will not be having a top 10, but we did record their spot, so I'm going to use that spot here. They are going to be the sponsor of the entire episode. Ramsor Records sponsors this episode of the Super Podcast, and we'll be playing that shortly, but that's where we're at. You guys know what my policy is. All my shows come out on a regular schedule. With Superpodcast, it's a whole different animal. This is my baby. This is my art. This is my body of work. And if I'm not happy with the finished product, no one else is going to fucking hear it. So that's where we're at, and hopefully I'm happy with Kurt Brown. And when we're done with today's recording,
I hope you're happy with him too.
And we'll release it. But that's where we're at, Kurt. And we have a really fun show, a really packed show. But that's why the show has been, well, this episode specifically took several days longer than I originally intended for it. It's because I just wasn't happy with the way things came out. And I finally made the decision that I wasn't going to release it as is. And here we are doing a retake the night before, or a redo the night before.
And away we go.
And away we go. Well, a few notes here, Kurt. I want to say a few things. I want to thank a few people. I want to thank Jace Nacarado. He's been helping out with some stuff behind the scenes. Thank you, Jace. I want to thank Christopher Albright, one of our loyal listeners. He just sent me a bunch of Nolan Ryan baseball cards when he was on the Mets, and I very much appreciate it. I actually do have a collection of Mets baseball cards that I've been collecting ever since I was a kid, a giant box somewhere in this house. So thank you very much, Christopher Albright. I very much appreciate it. And I also want to thank Frank the Collector. We've mentioned him in the past. He has sent in various things to myself, to Scott Cornish. Who knows who else he has sent things to? I want to thank him. He sent me a vinyl single of the Junkyard Dog and Vicky Sue Robinson, Grab Them Cakes. I would also like to thank the U.S. Postal Service for breaking that record in half before I actually opened the fucking envelope to get it. But I know people at the post office. I'll be calling Jamie Ward to file a complaint. But once again, thank you, Frank the Collector. I do appreciate you sending another fine item for my growing collection of weird wrestling items. I got some really cool ones recently. I got a Roy Shire pencil with an 8-ball eraser.
Oh my God, that's cool.
Yeah. What's the coolest thing in your collection? I once saw a picture, I guess it would have been you in your apartment years ago, maybe 30 years ago, Kurt, but you had like a Tiger Mask figure.
Yes, I had gotten that many, many years ago. There's a store that's very famous in Hollywood in the Los Feliz district called Wacko. It used to be one of the stores on Melrose in Hollywood, and they just had offbeat stuff. And even back before Lucha was cool to the gringo audience, like in the 80s, they would sell wrestling masks, and they used to have those little tiny Japanese wrestling dolls, like the little rubber muscle dolls you'd get in the gum machine.
Yeah.
I don't have the Tiger Mask anymore. The coolest thing I have in my collection, I don't have it readily available, but what I'm planning on getting like me a man curio soon. And amongst the coolest things that will be in that curio are my wind-up giant Baba doll, where you not wind up, but a little button where you push it and he goes around chopping things with his arm.
Beautiful.
There is my bottle of Monsol's powder, which I treasure really greatly. I still have my Freddie Blassie paper mask that I bought at the very first show at the Olympic Auditorium I went to in 1973. These were essentially oval-shaped pieces of cardboard with a wrestler's picture on it, and like right under their eyes, 2 squares are cut out so you can put rubber band it around your head and go around saying, "Hey, look, I'm Freddie Blassie. I'm Ernie Ladd."
Yeah, who did that? How many people?
I have no idea, but I
did that.
And it seems like the most ludicrous thing, but I bought it, and I know I still have it to this day. And other cool things, I have the Frank Gotchen, the Frank Hackenschmidt. Oh, I was remembering the outlaw wrestler Gockenschmidt. The Frank Hackenschmidt card. Now, if there was a Gockenschmidt baseball card, that would be the coolest thing ever.
You mean Gotch Hackenschmidt?
Yeah, Gotch Hackenschmidt, yes. And his brother Bula. They do their Hindu squats, yes.
What about Tiger Joginder Singh?
Tiger Joginder Singh. Thousands and thousands of Hindu squats for days at a night on a mountaintop. I'm telling you, the angel fights the devil for years on end, all by doing Hindu squats.
Dr. Jerry in Memphis. That's something we never got to experience.
Ooh, he would have been so key.
How do you think he would have done in a studio wrestling setting? Seriously.
I think he would have felt right at home. because getting him on the mic is what is magic. I remember in Harley Race's autobiography, at some point he referenced Dr. Jerry Graham's interviews as stream of consciousness projects or something like that. So studio wrestling would have been home to him. He would have loved it.
Well, a few more notes here, Kurt, at the top of the show. I want to mention to everyone, we now have Mothership bumper stickers. There's a Mothership sticker set. You get a Mothership bumper sticker, 2 Mothership circle stickers, as well as the hot dog sticker. You can get those at tinyurl.com/superpodstore, along with all other t-shirts, stickers, magnets, and everything else we have there. tinyurl.com/superpodstore. Get your Mothership bumper sticker today. I gotta mention this too. I recently heard on the radio, I was driving around, and one of the great things about living here in North Jersey is I have direct access to WFMU 91.1. Free-form radio. This has been a weird and awesome radio station going back.
It's a great station.
Yeah, and, it's one thing picking it up over the internet. It's another thing when you could actually listen to it in your car. It's really, really cool. And I was driving around listening, and a song came on, and it was one of those things where I listened to it, I liked it, I didn't pay attention to the lyrics, but I hit Shazam on my phone so that whatever the song was, I would have the name of it and I could buy it later on. Well, it turns out the DJ plugged the song at the end of it, and he said, and that song is dedicated to Stan Stasiak and Ox Baker. It's from the Mighty Jabronis. It's called Heart Punch My Heart.
I love it.
And I love the song. I bought it. I actually bought it on vinyl too, and I just want to give them a plug here. Check that out. The Mighty Jabronis, Heart Punch My Heart. If you're into good old punk rock, check it out. I did like it. And I believe Scott Cornish told me the host of the show was Toddophonic Todd Abramson on WFMU. So check that out. Once again, the Mighty Jabronis, Heart Punch My Heart. What a catchy title that is, Kurt.
I'll have to ask Pat Howitt if he still has the tracks when he was in the band Foreign Object that he did with the late Stephen De Leon that had great songs like You Ain't Nothing But Garbage. And Stephen used to cut great promos on the audiences at the matches. He'd go full-fledged heel on them to the point where occasionally somebody would want to take him on in the ring.
Well, a couple more things, Kurt, and this is a little bit on a downer note. But I wanted to make reference to a couple recent passings, and we have had a lot of recent passings in professional wrestling. So many.
Way too many.
Every day I feel like we wake up and I see a couple more. As we're recording today, Jim Jameson, longtime Memphis undercard wrestler, has passed away. I just saw that. Viano 3, or I guess you're supposed to call him Viano Tres, but I've always called him Viano 3. He just passed away. I actually know that Lucha has seen a bunch of legends die in the last few months.
Way too many. Viano Tercero was he was the nucleus of the Vianos, and I didn't realize that until I started going to Tijuana regularly between 89 and 91. And every time the Vianos were a trio, it was specifically Viano Tercero who was over. To me, they were 3 Vianos, and if I watched them week after week after week, I could tell them apart. But to me, here's 3 masked guys coming into the Pink Panther theme song, and it's just amazing. The people loved this guy. If they tore at his mask, and he loved to juice the shit out of himself. He was like part of the Abdullah the Butcher Club. The fans just went apeshit over this guy, and I know he's come close to getting to the Observer Hall of Fame. He's somebody who should have been automatically put in there. That guy was a draw on his own, as a draw as a trios participant. It's a real bummer.
One of the things we need to look at doing more on the show about in the next year would be some Lucha history. So you and I will be speaking more about that in the future here, because it's something I have thought about, especially with all the recent passings of some of the legends of Lucha Libre.
Budokan.
Yeah, I haven't talked to you since Budokan passed away. What did you think when you heard the news? I
was heartbroken. We had just lost Gil Arellano, who ran Gil's gyms for years. And that was a blow. And then I feel especially bad because I didn't get a chance to visit him before he passed. But, he lived a good life, 77 years old, had a lot of friends, made a lot of claims, some of which were true and some of which weren't. but he was one of the most genuinely kind people that I've known, especially when you're in indie wrestling and everybody thinks they're a bigger deal than they are. He is one of those guys who he was nice to everybody, whether you were a new kid wandering into the dressing room or an old pro. And a couple of people I'd just love to mention. They're not people I don't think listeners would recognize, but in 2018 lost Dan Daniels, who was Tom Hankins' tag partner. This is Perry Reed, and a man by the name of Stuart Shaning, who was somebody I was friends with back to the 80s. And he was somebody who you wouldn't recognize his name because he didn't read newsletters. He wasn't like super into wrestling. He was like one of those teenagers who got really into WWF when it took off, nationwide in the 80s. But the cool thing was he always wanted to see my Japan tapes, and he really got into them. He didn't start like taking the Observer or anything like that. He didn't get super into wrestling, but he always wanted to see my Japan stuff, especially stuff with Brody and Fujinami. He passed away a little too young. He had been in bad health for several years, but I just want to give him a salutation. His brother Steve is the one who I did that Dr. Jerry Graham interview with in 1984. And not to get too sentimental, but just at these men's passing, I just want to read just a quick passage by the Australian philosopher Lord David Dundas. When I wake up in the morning light, I put on my jeans, and I feel all right. I pull my blue jeans on. I pull my older jeans on. You and me will go motorbike riding in the sun and the wind and the rain. I know that passage has gotten many of us through a rough time.
You have to forgive me. I wasn't prepared for that passage. But on that note, I actually wanted to mention a couple other people who recently passed away, and they didn't get a lot of attention, but I could say that when I stop and I think about them, they both had an impact on me. So I want to make a reference here or make a mention of it. One is Coach Kurt Schneider. Never met the guy. I only knew him as Coach Kurt. He had Coach Kurt's wrestling line. 976-1111 in New York. I believe in Chicago and Detroit, it was 976-6363. And this was really great, Kurt. In the early 90s, when I was in high school, at lunch, I can go to the payphone and for a quarter, call Coach Kurt's wrestling line and get all the news that hadn't arrived in the Observer to my house yet. Because
that's cool.
It would get to him in Michigan or wherever he lived before it would get to me in Long Beach, New York. So every single day you can call and get the latest wrestling news. And it wasn't just what was in the Observer. He clearly had other sources because he would break news. I would hear things on the Coach Kurt wrestling line before I would hear it anywhere else. And like I said, every single day for at least a year, at least when I was a freshman, every single day I put a quarter in that payphone to call Coach Kurt's wrestling line, 976-1111. And I had just heard that he passed away at 67 years old on August 9th. So I wanted to make a mention of it here. I know he was a part of the Midwest wrestling community, a part of Motor City Wrestling, and probably various other independent outfits in the area. So Coach Kurt Schneider, Coach Kurt's wrestling line, rest in peace.
And again, that's what I really dig about this show is, man, you're giving the most three-dimensional history of wrestling here. It's not just the wrestlers and promoters you're covering. You're covering fans, hangers-ons, people who did odd jobs, newsletter writers. This is showing the biz in every viewpoint possible.
One more I want to mention here, and this one I was very, very sad to hear about, but Brian Danovich passed away. That's a name that I would guess most of you don't know. He would be best known for appearing on one of the versions of Tough Enough for the WWE, the one where they were out on the beach. I want to say he tore his bicep. Actually, I believe it was his chest. He tore his pec. And that way, and because of that, he wasn't able to finish the competition. So they gave him a contract, but I don't believe things worked out for him there. I feel really bad about this because I actually knew him back when we were teenagers. I think I'm actually the person responsible for getting him going with wrestling school. I could be wrong, but I believe that's true. He was someone I met when I was about 15 or 16. I was at a convention with Georgianne Macropolis and some other people, and he was with another group of people, and I started talking to him. He was also from Long Island. He was maybe a year or two younger than me. And, you know, when you meet someone who lives near you and they like wrestling and you're a kid, you can't wait to talk to them. And me and him became fast friends. We hung out a lot. He was in the car with me when we picked up Tracy Smothers, a story I told way back on the show. When I was a teenager and Tracy Smothers stayed at my house when he worked in the garden, Brian Danovich was in the car with us when we went to LaGuardia Airport to pick him up. He was so nervous, we had to get a plastic bag. He started puking in the bag.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was such a big wrestling fan, and it wasn't like me. He wasn't really into like finding Japanese tapes or older tapes. He grew up on WWE and his dream was, or WWF, and his dream was to be a WWF wrestler. And he acted like it even when he was young. When he was in high school, he was on the wrestling team and he was a big kid. He would send out autograph photos to people. He sent me one, you know, like, keep watching for the future. He very much developed his own professional wrestling personality and character as a teenager. And there were times where it just, you know, I think professional wrestling may have had too much of an influence over him where, you know, I remember one time he had a girlfriend who, you know, he ended up, they had a great time. They were together. They were at a great time. And then he was watching ECW and he called her up and he gave her this Raven promo about how he wants her to feel his pain. And I believe she like called the cops. You know?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago, but it was pretty interesting. But he was a good guy, a really nice guy, a big fan of wrestling. He made a lot of decisions when we were younger that, you know, looking back now, like if I'm going to be honest, he got into steroids when I would never even consider it. I mean, there was a time we actually talked about becoming a tag team together, breaking into the wrestling business and, you know, doing it together because we were friends. And then I realized there's no future. And we're in the wrestling business.
You're very wise. If you're going to be a wrestler and there's other things in your life besides wrestling, do it for kicks on an indie level. It's a rabbit hole that you have to embrace 100% if you want it to be a career.
And unfortunately, I think for Brian, there was no other option. It was he was going to be a professional wrestler. He was going to be a WWE superstar or bust. And for one reason or another, and I don't know all the reasons, it didn't work out. The last time I saw him was when I was about 21 or 22, and I was running the sales department at what was then the largest fitness center on Long Island. And he was about to go to Les Thatcher's training school. I had gotten him in there. And he came to say goodbye, and it was right when Sid Vicious broke his leg on Nitro, because he brought the tape to show me, and we watched it, we talked about it, and then I didn't hear about him or hear from him for years. No heat or anything, we just had distance, and I just heard from him several times in the last few months. You know, he had messaged me, he had been listening to the show. I know he must have been living at home with his parents, because he sent me a phone number, and it was a phone number I actually remembered from when he was a kid growing up in Belmore. So I know he had a difficult time, but very, very sad to hear about his passing. A very nice guy, someone I was very good friends with during my teenage years, and I'm very sorry to hear about that, man. Yeah, I feel really bad. You know, I feel really bad. I from what I gather, I did a little bit of research after I heard the news because I was very upset. You know, whenever you hear about someone you knew when you were younger dying, you're like, what happened? Like, how did they end up? Oh, absolutely. There? And I guess he's had a rough time in the last few years with medical issues. But once again, Brian Danovich, a Long Island friend of mine from my early days around the wrestling business. Very, very sad to hear he passed away just recently. But with that, Kurt, let's move on a little bit. I want to, let's change the pace here. Before we go to our segments, I want to read an article. I have not read this before. I guess it had been out for a few years. It's from 2014. It's called Lord of the Ring. Big Sky resident earned big reputation as undersized wrestling pro. Have you ever heard of this article about Pat Tanaka?
I haven't, no.
All right, let me read this to you. When he was 12 years old, Big Sky resident Pat Tanaka decided to move out of his parents' house and live with his friends in an apartment. He was earning more than $1,000 a week and could easily pay the rent and other bills. So let me reiterate. When he was 12 years old, Pat Tanaka claims that he moved out of his parents' house to live with his friends and he was making more than $1,000 a week.
Well, I think somebody should have called Child Services and see what's going on there.
Now 52, the soft-spoken Tanaka has semi-retired from a lifestyle that made him millions and a household name amongst wrestling fans.
It made him millions of what?
That's a very good question. It doesn't specify that. It mentions a title that he won here on some indie show. mentions that he now coaches and trains Olympic athletes and police squads around the countries. Tanaka first visited Big Sky in the summer of 2012 and moved here shortly thereafter. It's a really magical place and very special, he said. He would know. His stints with the wrestling associations have taken him around the world. When Pat was 3, his father, professional wrestler Duke Kiyamuka, began training him. My dad just knew I was going to be trouble. He didn't train my siblings, Pat says. Pat laughs, excuse me. What exactly can a 3-year-old do? You'd be surprised. Calisthenics, discipline stuff. I really just took to it. Even then, I needed discipline, he laughs. By 5, he was doing judo and amateur wrestling bantam competitions. Tanaka claims he was never good at any other sports, though he loved to watch and tried to play baseball, football, and basketball. When he was 12, he won a judo world championship in Japan in the open division, competing against coaches and competitors in their 20s. Much to his father's dismay, Tanaka turned down Olympic opportunities. He was already used to the money he earned as a referee. So hold on. At the age of 12, because that's what they said earlier in the article.
Wait. Okay. The Olympic opportunities. I want to get to that. I have no recollection of Mr. Patrick Tanaka being phoned up to say, hey, we need some people to set up chairs at the Olympic event, the track and field event today. I don't think he did that.
You don't remember 12-year-old Pat Tanaka winning the World Judo Championship in Japan in the open division?
Oh, that's right. His tag team partner was Martine Cardigan, and the Queen of England gave them both medals for it.
I don't know. His partner may have been Hangman Pobans based on the way this article is going. But let's finish this. Still training took up a good portion of his childhood, but he didn't mind. I was really, really into it, he said. It's what I wanted to do more than anything else. Every single day right after school, I would practice. I really loved baseball, basketball, and football, but I just wasn't any good at those sports. He keeps going back to the idea he couldn't play any other sports. At the age,
I'm a total fuck up, so I'm going to be a wrestler instead.
At the age of 9, Tanaka started setting up rings for professional wrestling. I can't speak. For professional wrestling. At 11, he was refereeing. The WWE filmed Wednesday mornings, and Tanaka would miss school to referee. One day when a wrestler did not show up, 12-year-old Pat was given a mask to hide his age and sent into the ring. His opponent was in his 20s. He went under, quote, stupid names like the Assassin.
Pat Tanaka.
Pat Tanaka went under stupid names like the Assassin. When he was 13, his wrestling buddies would pick him up from his Tampa high school and drive him to their competitions throughout Florida. He would not make it home till 2 a.m. and then would have to train in the morning and attend school the next day. It was a 7-day-a-week schedule. All the guys that I was working with were huge stars and my mentors. I was really lucky and blessed to be on the road with these guys, Tanaka said. I was the envy of the kids at high school because I had my own apartment and was on television, but the girls weren't allowed to hang out with me because I was the bad guy. He was a referee. What do you mean he was the bad guy? But anyway, at 16, Tanaka went to Japan to wrestle for a week and was invited to train in one of the world's best dojos. The training, which lasted a year, was tough even by his standards. He returned to the States, finished high school, and as luck would have it, professional wrestling was entering its glory days in the 1980s. Tanaka received his first of several big contracts when he was 18. $1.2 million for 6 years. Now,
did you just say $1.2 million for 6 years? Did you just say that?
I just said Pat Tanaka received his first of several big contracts when he was 18. $1.2 million for 6 years.
Okay, wait, hold on right there. Well, let me do some figuring. Okay, 5, 10, 15. I just want to make certain. I only have 25 Ativans in this in my little bottle here, but from the way I feel, I think there should only be 10 left now. I don't know what's going on.
Well,
I feel like a fool.
Well, here's a quote from Pat. You just squandered the money when you were young. There was no one there to guide me. My father had passed away. You were delusional at the time. You think the money will just keep coming. But it doesn't, he says matter-of-factly. Sitting out for a concussion was unheard of. When he broke his leg and told he would lose his spot if he took time off, Tanaka persevered. In a span of 4 years, he suffered 33 concussions. The only time he took off was when he broke his neck. At 5 foot...
he walked it off 2 weeks later and was fine.
At 5'8" and 180 pounds, Tanaka wrestled opponents as large as 6'5" and 230 pounds. I was the first short guy to go in the ring, and I was very blessed.
I so wish Bull Curry was alive so we could go up to him and says, this guy says he was the shortest wrestler ever to make it big in the ring.
Tanaka named one of his tag teams Bad Company after his favorite band at the time. They returned the favor by playing live when he walked to the ring at one of his events. Did that ever happen?
I don't know. I don't think so.
In the dying days of the AWA, did they get Bad Company to play for Bad Company? I don't remember that.
No, I think Pat Tanaka's neighbors played that every time he came home.
Yeah. Well, WrestleMania, he says, was a nice gig, as he made $1 million a day.
Wait. WrestleMania was $1 million a day.
A day. Yes. Still, he went through the money, buying homes for friends, staying in the best hotels, and purchasing whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. If I saw a car that was $60,000, I bought it. I never argued over the price. I just paid it, he says. Reflecting on his career and concussions, Tanaka has but one telling regret. I outlived the money. Although officially retired more than a dozen years ago, events like WrestleCon, which give him an opportunity to interact with fans, are worth the effort. Looking out the window of his Big Sky home, Tanaka comments, "It's just gorgeous here. This is not your everyday scene." But his has not been an ordinary life. And that's an article from the Bozeman Daily Chronicle from May 8th, 2014 by Laura Bell on Pat Tanaka, Lord of the Ring.
I remember when Ron Skoler was promoting the AAA shows, and that's when with Ron Skoler I'd booked like the local boys, and right. I think it was on the second show, Skoler called me up and said, "We're pulling Mercurio from the six-man tag," and I'm going, well, okay, I don't know why, but and then he gave it to Pat Tanaka, so you have this lucha match with 5 luchadores and Pat Tanaka. And I remember I was talking to Conan on the phone. I'm saying, hey, Mercurio's pulled from the match, and, I know there's nothing I can do, but I mean, that's like $100 to him. And, that's, that was a payday for him, a decent one. And Conan said, well, Tanaka's a friend of mine, so I got him booked. And, I understand that. And he says, you know how that works. But boy, it made it a bad match just having him in there. They hated working with that guy.
I was never a fan of Conan the Booker. I have to be honest.
Conan is one of the most intriguing people I know. I can genuinely say I love him, but, if I lived with him, I'd always be looking over my shoulder because I know he's somebody who's,
he's like Omarosa.
What's that?
He's like the Omarosa of Lucha Libre.
How's that?
I mean, he's just like this character that everywhere he goes, problems arise. Every single
they do that, and see, that's what intrigues me about him. I mean, we get along. He's been very nice to me, but that doesn't mean I hear so many people say like, oh yeah, they did this and this to the other person, but they were nice to me, so they're a good person. Where I'm saying, yeah, he's always been good to me, very nice to me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to trust him because he's somebody who plays the business and brings a lot of trouble to it. But what amazes me is he's an ultra cat because he doesn't have 9 lives. He has 18 lives. The number of bridges he's burned, but then has been able to go back to. I think about CMLL as the only person who would never take him back. I mean, he had terrible falling outs with AAA twice, and now he's back again. And the thing I will say for him is I knew him when he was maybe 2 years into the business, and he was the first wrestler I ever knew who just got every wrestling tape he could get under the sun and study them and figure out how somebody like him would get over. Because when he first started out, he tried to do a lot of flying stuff. and he could do them okay. He did them good, actually. But the thing is, here's this huge jack bodybuilder, and it didn't fit. And he was smart enough to find out how somebody like him would get over, but at the same time, he's not too tactful and gets himself in sticky messes.
Does anyone hold the grudge as well as the Luderoth descendants at CMLL?
Does anybody hold a grudge, I mean, with Conan personally?
With anyone. As someone screws them over, it's just like they're gone. We're not even considering bringing this person back.
From what I understand, it's all Paco Alonso. It's not so much the entire organization, it's him. He's the one who has the final say. And he's like a child. When his ego gets hurt, he doesn't realize, hey, this person I had a falling out with, we can make up with. And because that's what a smart promoter or wrestler would do. You realize you have these terrible falling outs, but you can still make money with each other. But I don't picture him ever taking Conan back. But he has used La Park or L.A. Park in the last few years, and a lot of people never thought they'd see that day. So either he's coming to a little bit, or maybe he's getting older and is letting other people have a little more power. But Paco Alonso, when I'd hate to see him and Mr. Pobans have an argument over their international sand sculptures, because they would never speak to one another again.
Well, we got to hope that conversation does not happen. But with that, Kurt, let's move on here with the show. The first segment we're going to go to here is Bobby Fulton, a friend of the show, discussing Nikolai Volkov. Of course, there was a famous match a few years back that a lot of people were talking about online where Nikolai and Bobby wrestled, but the ring didn't show up. So they had to wrestle without any ring. We're going to talk about that day. And before we do that, we're going to go to a few words about Ramseur Records, the sponsor of this week's episode. Of course, Ramseur. You can go to ramseurrecords.kungfustore.com. But let's go to this. This plug was originally going to be at the beginning of the top 10, but we will not be having a top 10 this week. Let's go to the plug, and then we'll go to Bobby Fulton, and we will be back on the other side. With that, let's get going with the top 10. And of course, the top 10 is brought to you by our friends, the wrestling fans over at Ramseur Records. And we want to tell you a little bit about one of Ramseur Records' great artists, Samantha Crane. We talked about her way back here on the show. Well, now she's on tour supporting the Oh Hellos on their fall tour. You can check her out. The tour begins on October 18th. The tour ends on November 18th. So for 1 month, 605ers, you have a chance to support a friend of the show, Samantha Crane and Ramseur Records. Here are some of the towns that she will be in, including Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, Raleigh, North Carolina, Athens, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Fairfield, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, Burlington, Vermont, Syracuse, New York, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Urbana, Illinois, Louisville, Kentucky, Asheville, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, and the tour winds up on the 18th of November in Fayetteville, Arkansas. There's no S. At George's Majestic Lounge. More information available wherever it is that you find more information. Just Google Samantha Crane, Oh Hellos, Fall Tour 2018. Once again, from Ramseur Records, Ramseur, Ramseur Records.
Wow, that's quite a swing. All of those I recall as being great wrestling towns, and I've been to the Westcott Theater in Syracuse a bunch of times. I may get a chance to check Samantha out when she's in my area.
Is the Westcott a nice place?
It is. It's a former porno theater. I saw the Jade Pussycat there.
All right. Well, another 605 plug ends in a classy manner here on the program.
Remember that sticky substance on the floor of the Westcott Theater is probably spilled beer.
Yes. It's been there since the opening of Misty Beethoven. I am happy to welcome back to the Superpodcast a man that some have called fantastic and some have called many other things. And that is your friend and mine, Bobby Fulton. Bobby, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate the opportunity anytime I can to come on your wonderful program.
It's always a lot of fun to talk to you on the program, but it will probably be fun today, but maybe a little bit differently, because we're going to talk a little bit about Nikolai Volkov, who, of course, just passed away. And as I said to you off air, I was trying to think of a good guest to talk to about Nikolai, and I had a short list, and I had a few people, and someone suggested Bobby Fulton. In fact, it was a friend of the show, Scott Cornish, who suggested Bobby Fulton. And I said, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, Bobby would be a great guest about Nikolai. So I want to know how you first met him and what are your earliest memories of Nikolai. But before any of that, he was a friend of yours. How are you doing, and what's this last week been like for you?
I'll tell you what, it's been very tumultuous for anybody within the wrestling industry, especially on what could be a Black Sunday for professional wrestling, as we lost 3 of our brothers, Brickhouse Brown, of course, Brian Christopher, and Nikolai Volkov. It was just a tough week, and it's terrible anytime this happens. And, it's just rough to realize we think of all of the wrestlers as superheroes that have no end. But then all of a sudden, it's the end of their life and the end of their story, so to speak. And it's just tough. You think about the family, you think about the friends, and all the great wrestling fans and those that have enjoyed all the great years of their matches and their contributions to the greatest sport in the world, professional wrestling. It's tough.
And in the case of Nikolai, his singing as well.
Yes. And not only that, his magic tricks.
well, he never showed those to the fans. He only showed them to you.
No. But I'm just saying that's another little thing. But you talk about the first time I met Nikolai Volkov was when I went up to do those TV tapings in Allentown and Hamburg and Allentown. And I was and another friend of mine, Mike Dupree, Chris Parsons, who does a lot with Dick the Bruiser stuff online and everything. We were up there, wrestling, and as a matter of fact, I've wrestled 2 or 3 times that night already, and all of a sudden they came to me and wanted me to wrestle Nikolai Volkov. Was already challenged, so instead, Mike Dupree got the nod there on that and went out and wrestled Nikolai Volkov on one of the tapes. But he was a giant of a man with a big barrel chest, and later on I heard the reason why he quit being Beppo Mongol is because of his haircut. And he had a hard time going out with his family with that famed Mongol look, with the long braided hair and, of course, the little bit of hair, tuft of hair in the front. And then, of course, Bill Eaton got the opportunity to be Bolo Mongol, so it was Bolo Gito, but then Beppo became Nikolai Volkov, which was a name used prior by another wrestler for many years in the Midwest. But like I said, Nikolai Volkov was a gentle giant, a big man. His story's impressive, where he came from, the communist country and struggles and things, and he lived the American dream. And for me, I really didn't wrestled on some shows with him, but as far as during the territory days, didn't wrestle really in the territories. We missed each other in territories and stuff like that, but we had a chance to wrestle on, like I said, some shows together and things. But I always remember his magic tricks, as you said, that the fans didn't get a chance to see, and his sense of humor. And not only that, we had one of the most famed matches that went viral the night that him and I in Marion, Ohio, wrestled on a gymnasium floor just a couple of years ago.
That's right. That show happened a few years back where, what was it? The ring never showed up, so you and Nikolai wrestled on the gym mats?
Well, it was one piece of carpet that they found in front of a door, and then the rest was just the gym floor. So it wasn't even a mat. It was like one of those runners that you have in front of a door. They laid that down, and what had happened, the story on the ring was, it was in Indiana, and the state trooper had stopped the ring trailer and said that tag is not for that trailer. So I just started my 8-hour shift. Don't move this trailer today. Take everything off the trailer. So long story short, the ring didn't make it, but nevertheless, him and I went out there and wrestled. And then after that got ridiculed by so many people because of the decision that we made. And it was so many people, not within the real wrestling industry, but within the backyard wrestling industry, thought it was an insult for us to have done what we had done. But hey, Brian, listen, it's all about the fans, and the show must go on. Even Honky Tonk Man told me. He remembers in Huntington, West Virginia, for the WWF, the ring didn't show up one night in a packed place, and they all wrestled on the floor. And even Wild Bull Curry in Manchester, Ohio one time, the ring didn't show up back in the days of big-time wrestling, and they wrestled on a high school gym floor. So it was not something that was never done before, but it was something that me and Nikolai Volkov talked about. And like I said, some people ridiculed it, and I think Sports Illustrated Internet had rated it one of the worst things to ever happen in professional wrestling since I don't know what. But it was a lot of fun, and it was tragic about Nikolai because that night, me and Nikolai did an interview that's online, and he talked about the importance of drinking water and about the health aspects and everything like that. And it just floored me, over his passing and everything. And he's 70 years old, young, Brian. I mean, and it's just tragic.
That night where the ring didn't show up, was Nikolai game right away? Did you have to convince him to go along with this, or?
Yeah. And what happened was the ring didn't come, and the promoter came to us and said, "There's no ring coming tonight," but there was fans there. I took it upon myself to announce to the wrestlers, "There's no ring, but we're going to wrestle." And I asked him, "Do you mind?" And he said, "I'm here. I'll do it." But there was a couple of guys that said, "If there's no ring, we can't wrestle. We're leaving," because there was no top ropes to jump off of. So they left. So it was left down to about 6 guys that wrestled on this show. And yes, Nikolai was for it 100%, all the way. He was a true professional.
When Nikolai was on WWF television in the mid-'80s, he was already an experienced professional. He had been a veteran for years.
Sure.
He was big and he was bulky and he wasn't a speedy guy, but it's easy to forget in the 70s, he was once a super impressive beyond just the physique. He was a fast, big powerhouse. And of course he had a few runs with Bruno, and he was just such an impressive.
Sure. He was unbelievable, great shape, that great big thick chest. And not only that, he was Boris Brezhnikov, and when he wrestled for, I think it was the name, when he wrestled for Verne in the AWA.
That's right.
Because as I said, that Nikolai Volkov had already been there in the 50s and the 60s. So when he went to work for Verne, he had changed his name. But yeah, he was great condition. He was a true athlete of any sense of the word. And like I said, a guy that could probably kill you. And I think he was a boxer, and just unbelievable, but what a gentleman and a nice guy. And I mean, like I said, it was just unbelievable news to hear that, especially being 70 years old, only 70. And I mean, I just seen him in New Orleans a couple of months back during WrestleMania weekend. Happy-go-lucky guy, great guy, just a jovial, I guess would be a word. Good guy, Brian, super nice. And like you said, in the 70s, he was a great big guy, but man, he could move and he was impressive and it was unreal, and he drew a lot of money. And I think even Vince McMahon said that Nikolai Volkov drew him and that company tons of money.
There you hear it, Bobby Fulton, the fantastic Bobby Fulton. I appreciate his time, and I appreciate him sharing some memories about Nikolai Volkov here on the show. Speaking of sharing memories here on the show, a while back, one of the most popular segments we've ever had was the segment on the Sugar Hold Challenge. Of course, that was where William Harding discussed the time in 1981 he got in the ring and he got out of Bob Roop's Sugar Hold. Since that time, Williams had an interesting journey in and around professional wrestling. We had an opportunity to catch up with him and find out what's been going on with our very own Sugar Hold champion. Let's go to this conversation right now with William Harding. I am very happy to welcome back to the Superpodcast someone who is on the short list for most popular guests, as well as someone who was in one of the most popular segments in show history. That is friend of the show, William Harding. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, Mr. Brian Last, and hello to all the 605 fans out there. I'm very glad to be back.
I feel like you've become a legend, in a lot of ways. I feel like you and this story about you and the sugar hole has taken on a whole new life since you appeared on the show. I think from what I recall, I had seen something on Facebook about the story and you had posted, and I got in touch with you and I asked you to come on the show. And as I said right there in the introduction, it was one of the most memorable segments in show history.
It's been a wild year, I can say that. In the original interview, when we did the original interview, or when you'd asked me to do it, I told my wife that there's a guy out there that wants to talk to me about that Bob Roop thing from all those years ago. And she said, okay. And I really didn't know what to think about it because, as you know, I'd been out of wrestling for a long time.
Yeah.
And then we did the interview. And then somebody on the 605 page, when we were still getting all the messages on the 605 main page, you had done the promo on Jim Cornette's Experience, episode 168, I believe. And some gentleman out there said that Cornette had popped on that. Now, I'm 56 years old, I had no idea what popped meant. So I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And they directed me to that episode, and I went and listened to it. And I swear to God, my mouth dropped to the floor when he said this was a famous story. And I'm like, oh, my God, Jim Cornette knows about this. And then I started looking up the history of the 605 podcast, and I started getting worried because I said, this is going to be a big thing. But look, when the episode came out, everybody was really great about it. And I got messages from all over the world, and my Twitter feed went from 39 people to it's over 8,000 something people now. And it's just been a wild, wild year.
You said that you told your wife that you were going to come on a show and tell the story. How aware was she of the story? I mean, I forget if I had asked you this originally, but in all the years after ICW and after that night with Bob Roop, was it a story you frequently told? Was it a story that your family frequently talked about?
She was glad I had somebody else to tell it to. She's like, I've heard this. No, honestly, like I said last year, when Bob and I did the Sugar Hole Challenge back on June 3rd, 1981, we talked about it around Frankfurt for a while, like 3 or 4 months. And then that was it. And it didn't come up again till 2001 on Kayfabe Memories when somebody was talking about it and Izzy Slapowitz commented on it. And I wrote the story up there. And I got a few emails about that. And then Bob did his interview with Scott Teal. And I started getting a few more emails about it, but it really didn't take off until we did our interview last year that aired, I think, the end of February.
Yeah, it was in February. It was the end. It was actually, it aired originally. The debut date was February 27th, 2017. It was episode 62. Of course, it was entitled Sugar Hole Challenge, as it should be, and you can go check that out at 605pod.com. And it became a very memorable segment, and you said that before that you really hadn't had much to do with wrestling in a very long time. Talk about what happened in the immediate aftermath.
Well, the interview aired that night, and 1:30 in the morning, I started getting Facebook Messenger messages. The first two I got was from Joe Stasi and Chauncey Faulkner from the ICW Outlaws of Old School Wrestling Facebook page.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to be part of that. And I said, sure. And I met up with Joe and I met up with Chauncey since. I've talked to them a lot about what went on and their memories of it. And Joe and I even went to, it was either Pikeville or Paintsville, to the BCW show down there with King Cantrell, somebody you know pretty well. And we went down there and sat with Bart Batten for the show and watched the event down there. It's been a crazy thing. Met up with Bo James, somebody else has been on your show a couple of times. And yeah. I've now worked with him over the last year with AMW and gotten to know him real well.
AMW is Bo's group that runs in Kentucky, correct?
Yeah, Appalachian Mountain Wrestling.
Right. Okay.
And the best thing, the funniest thing that came out of it was that Bobby Blaze had sent me a message on Twitter saying how much he enjoyed that interview. And he said he was going to be at the Lexington Comic-Con in a few weeks. This was last year. And he said, come on down, I'd like to meet you. And I said, sure, I'll come on down there. And he was down there with Jim Cornette and Al Snow. So I go down there, and I find they're in Wrestlers Row there. And I find him, and I introduce myself. I said, Mr. Bobby Blaze. He said, yes, sir. I said, William Harding. He jumps up. He's like, it's the Sugar Hole guy. Al Snow practically leaps across the table, sticks his hands out, and says, how the hell did you do that? You know, which is a question I've gotten a lot from wrestlers
I'm sure.
over the last year. And I talked to them for a while, and then Jim had come back from a panel, and in between people that were meet and greet with him, he wanted to know the story as well. So I stood there for like an hour talking to him, which was great. I love talking to him. I love seeing him work. And it's just been wild. I mean, messages from all over the world, meet and greeting a lot of people. Fun times. Fun times.
You said you did some work for Bo James's Appalachian Mountain Wrestling. What exactly have you done?
Appalachian Mountain Wrestling actually belongs to Kyle Maggard, and Bo works with Kyle on it.
Oh, okay.
I do remote filming for them. They have a show that airs called AMW Heroes and Icons that airs on the CBS affiliate in Hazard, Kentucky, WYMT. And I originally met them because Kyle thought that I was part of the 605, that I was one of the people that worked on it. And I had talked to him about doing a couple of segments, like going down and filming a couple of things for my Twitter page and my Facebook page. And that's kind of turned into an ongoing thing. And I do it for the love of the sport. I do it because of one of the things that we had talked about, where I had originally thought about asking Angelo for a job in lieu of that money that I was supposed to get.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, you're never too old to learn. And I've had a great time with those guys down there. Al Snow's been down there working with us on that too. One of the guys in the promotion went viral. The progressive liberal Daniel Richards. That's been huge.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a growing promotion. We're getting a lot of really good people in there. Bard Batten has even come on at times to do television commentary. So I'm getting to hear a lot of great stories from people as well. It's cool sitting back in the locker room listening to everybody talk.
What's it like for you, though? Because it's not like you went from being a huge fan in the moment to all of a sudden working with a wrestling group. You were someone who really walked away from wrestling, someone who didn't have the interest that you once had in it as it had changed and evolved. So what's it like for you all these years later to be back involved with wrestling?
Well, let's say the interest hasn't waned. It's just the style of wrestling has changed. I wasn't a huge fan of the new product. I like the old school wrestling because it was a different attitude, different time. You know, you didn't have the music, you know, you didn't have all the lights. That people just came out and they were who they are. You know, they walked out, you knew it was Ronnie Garvin, you knew it was Bob Roop, you knew it was Bob Orton Jr., Lanny, Randy, all those guys. You just knew who they were. And before that, it was Tojo and Jerry and Bill Dundee. And it wasn't gimmicks. I mean, they were just who they were. And they got in there and they didn't do all the acrobatics or anything. It was just good old solid wrestling. And that's what I like about Appalachian Mountain Wrestling, because that's exactly what they're doing there. You know, you're not going to see a bunch of the acrobatics or like some of the crazy stuff you've seen on the Mothership with some of those GIFs they put out there about people injuring themselves.
Oh,
boy, it's just good, solid family entertainment. And that's what I really enjoy about AMW.
You mentioned Bart Batten earlier. Since the Sugar Hole Challenge episode aired, are there other ICW wrestlers or company personnel that you've spoken with?
Talked to Ronnie Garvin. I think it was almost immediately after that, but he didn't remember it. But he was there that night. And trying to think of who else I've talked to. I talked to Lanny. I saw Lanny on May 5th of this year. AMW was doing a Hall of Fame honoring Angelo, Randy, and Lanny. And he had a lot of questions for me. And I stood there just talking to him for a while before the show started and had a really good time with him, had a really good meet with him. He just told me to have fun with all the stuff that's been going on lately. And I have. You know, I've got to meet a lot of people. I got to sign some autographs and take some pictures, and it's been a blast. It really has.
Have people asked you to put them in the sugar hold?
Yes.
I knew it. What do you do? What do you do in that situation? How do you let your fans down?
Well, I'll do it. I'm not going to stretch them. You know, if they want to see a demonstration of it, because I just put, as a matter of fact, Bo James, we were in Hyden, Kentucky, And to the surprise of the guy he was working with, he put him in a sugar hold just for my amusement. Even on the video, he says, "Here you go, William." And I put that on YouTube, and I said, "Okay, guys, you want to see what it is? Here it is." Okay.
Yeah, because that is the frequent question still. Even after the episode aired, you hear from so many people, exactly what is the sugar hold? I still don't understand what it is and how you apply it.
Well, think of somebody putting a can opener on your head. That's about the best way I can say. It's actually, I think it's kind of a simple hold. You're just laying on either side of your body, and somebody comes in behind you and put your ribs, you can put your ribs on the back of their ribs, wrap your arm around the back of their head, which means both of their arms are behind them, and then you underhook the bottom arm. And with your other arm, you can grapevine the leg, or you can grab the knee, or you can actually arm bar in front of the midsection and hold them down, which I think is probably the most effective way to do it. And then you just lean into it and press that head into the body, and it puts all that pressure on the head and the back of the spine. And it's, even Lanny said, it's one of those holds that can kill you if you do it improperly. And but there's that video out there that Bob did, or somebody did of Bob, where it's called "Roop Stretches a Wannabe,"
right?
Or
that's
something
in
like
the Snake Pit in Tampa, Florida, and it's Bob Roop at Eddie Graham's behest, stretching someone, and from what I gather, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is a portion of that video where he actually does apply a version of the sugar hold.
First 45 seconds.
So watch that video, the first 45 seconds or the sugar hold.
Yeah, I went out there. I finally saw that video, and the funny thing is that there were some comments after I did my interview with you, and one of them said, "I guess this isn't William Harding." So...
You see, you've become a legend. How does it feel? I know I have heard that apparently other people in wrestling have tweeted about the sugar hold. Was it X-Pac? Is that who, am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, Sean Waltman and Rip Rogers had tweeted back and forth. They were talking about ribs and wrestling. Sometimes that's all you get out of it. And Sean had replied back to Rip that, did anybody in the ICW ever get paid except for that guy that got the $1,000 from Bob Roop? And that was 2 years before we talked. And then I found an interview with Lanny talking to Sean Waltman about it. Sean has this fascination with it. And it was a year before we did our interview, and he talked to him about it. So all this has been going on without my knowledge until this last year. I've probably learned more about the sugar hold and its nefarious history in the last year than I've ever known in my lifetime.
When I said you have become a legend, it's not even because of the sugar hold. It's because you got the money out of Angelo. That's why you've become a legend. How many people go right to that? They want to talk about the sugar hold, but they can't believe the money aspect of the story.
Really, they just want to talk about the sugar hold. Most of the pro wrestlers I've met just want to know how I got out of it. That's the question. How the hell did you do that? Got that from Bobby Eaton. But most of the guys I work with, they want to know how I got out of it. And I said, you're going to have to go to 605 and listen to the interview. I explain it step by step. And it's just funny that all these people that I've watched on television for so long are now asking me questions, and they're really interested in the answer. It's kind of bizarre. As a matter of fact, Scott Cornish had posted on when you were talking about a minute ago about if I'd ever been asked to do it again, and he posted out there when I said I was going to go down there and meet Bob Roop. He asked me if I was going to do the challenge with him again. And I said, dude, at this time, you're going to have to call it the cardiac clutch because one of us ain't coming out of it.
Well, you bring up Bob Roop there. I do want to talk about this. Of course, a great friend of mine, someone who is a host here on the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdrin and Barry. Barry Rose runs these really great championship wrestling from Florida Fan Fest, and I know you recently attended one of them, and it was quite memorable.
I saw where Bob had gone back out, where he was in one of your fans on the Mothership page had posted that Bob was in Texas doing meet and greet.
Bob Roop you're speaking of,
Yeah, Bob Roop. And I didn't know he was back out, so I looked up online to see where he was coming that was local. And the next event I saw was Lutz, Florida, just right outside of Tampa. And amazingly enough, on the very weekend of the 37th anniversary of it. So I messaged Barry about how to get tickets. And I told him who I was, and I wanted to come down there, just meet Bob and shake his hand and say hi. And he told me how to get the tickets, and I went ahead and got my tickets. And he messaged me back a couple days later. He said, would you be interested in doing a panel with Bob Roop for the fans in attendance? I said, sure. If Bob's good with it, I'm good with it. So a few days after that, he said, okay, it's set up. And I said, great. I didn't know what to expect. He said Bob was really enthusiastic about it. I was looking forward to doing it. It would be the first time that I had actually seen him since the night of the challenge 37 years ago. And I went down there and got my room with Marriott and Barry and Jeff Bowden. We all went out to Portillo's restaurant the night before. Bob got in there late that night, so I didn't get to see him on Friday. But the funny thing the next morning was that I was going to go out to my car to get something out of the car. And as I'm walking out, there's a lobby of the Marriott, and there's like a breakfast area, and then there's this marble bar that has bar stools with it. Just runs down the middle. It's kind of where everybody congregates. And I saw Bob sitting there. So I went on out to my car, and I got my thing out, and I came back. And as I started to walk up, I was behind him, and everybody on the other side of the bar started smiling. You know, I could see Barry smiling, and all these other guys. And I walked up there, and almost as soon as I got up to him, he turned around and looked at me, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Rube, William Harding." And I shook his hand, and he said, "Well, hello." And he just started to laugh a little bit, and he looked me up and down. He said, "You can't do it now." So once everybody else stopped laughing, I just looked at him and said, "Well, let's move some chairs and tables here, partner." But it's one of those things where you worry about, meeting your heroes and stuff, and you want it to be a good experience. And this whole thing was just a tremendous experience. We had talked off and on during the day, and then we went in and had they had the convention going on, and I came in there. And also while I was down there with him that morning, talking to him, up walks Dory Funk Jr. And they start talking like, it was yesterday for them and how great it was to see each other after all this. It was just great to be standing there listening to all this. Two legends sitting here right in front of me. But we went on in, and they started the convention, and there were a lot of great people there. Buddy Colt was there, Steve Kern. The whole thing was about Bob Roop and Steve Kern and this angle that they had about the POW gimmick back in the day, which was a tremendous story to sit there and listen to that. And then I found out that I'm going to be going on with Bob. Bob's going to do an hour-long talk with the fans after the Steve Kern and Bob Roop segment. And then I'm coming on to finish it with him. And I thought, okay, wow. So main event, Saturday night. So I get on there, and I basically tell everything that I told in the original interview. And nobody left. I mean, everybody was just sitting there transfixed listening. It was great talking to all these people, and they had questions. And Bob was really good about it. And the only thing that we really disagreed on, and this is something that I want to clear up for a lot of people, since I talked about that time limit thing last year, the dispute about the time limit.
Right. They had claimed, let me remind everyone, when the Sugar Hold Challenge happened, you got out of the Sugar Hold. One of the claims that they made in an attempt not to pay you was that you had gone past the time limit, but upon inspection, very basic inspection with your eyes, you realized there was no way they were keeping time. There was no way they would be able to justify that you had gone above or below any sort of time limit that was never agreed upon to begin with.
Right. When I started talking about that, Bob said, point of rebuttal. And he starts talking about, that there was a time limit and all that. And I honestly believe, I truly believe this, because I've heard him say it enough, and I take his word for it on this, that he was operating on the assumption that there was a time limit. And he had left the ring after I had the dispute with him about, that he didn't have a watch on, the referee didn't have a watch on. And he was already on his way back to the dressing room when I confronted the people down at the table, the timekeepers, where they didn't have a clock or stopwatch or watches.
There was no timekeeping, yeah.
There was no timekeeping. But I do believe him when he said he was operating on the assumption that there was a time limit. But then I asked him, I said, but, nobody called it or anything. Nobody said anything about it until I was up and out. And that he said he knew it was getting close to the end of the time. He was just trying to hang on to me. But he said it was like hanging on to a wildcat because I was fighting so hard, and I had him scissor locked anyway. And I was putting a pretty good hurt on him, too. And then I got out, and I'm jumping up, and then the referee jumps up and starts screaming about the time limit. So we cleared that up between us. And I think that's all good. But I do believe that he was operating on the idea that there was a time limit, because I believe they did this at a couple of other events before they got to Frankfurt.
Had anyone ever gone to the time limit?
No. Nobody ever got there. He submitted everybody in less than 15 seconds.
What is it like for you? I mean, here, you originally told the story on the show in February of 2017, and it was just me and you, and then eventually so many other people heard it, obviously. But what's it like for you to tell the story in front of Bob?
I had no problem with it. I actually felt pretty comfortable talking to him. He agreed with everything I said. But the thing for him is that there were a lot of things. We talked briefly back in 2001, I found out. I thought it was 2004. It's actually 2001. And he knew about my martial arts training, and he knew about a couple of other things that I talked about. But we never really went in depth of what happened to me that night. He only knew his side of the story.
Oh, so he never knew the whole thing about everything after he left the ring.
Right. He never knew about the police locking me up twice. He actually got mad at Bob Orton about what he said to me in the ring, Bob Orton Jr.
That was because Bob Orton came out after you wouldn't leave the ring. You had gotten on the house mic and said, I want my money. You were standing in the ring. The people were all behind you because they had witnessed this. And they send out Bob Orton, a tough guy from reputation, obviously we know as well. And he basically tells you that he's going to mess you up if you don't get out of there. And you don't back down. You still don't get out of there.
Well, what it was, and I'll just tell everybody what he said. It's a little profane. I hope you don't mind. But what it was, I was standing there, and he came out, and he signaled me to put the microphone down, come over, talk to him. And when I went over there, I put my hands on the second rope. I had my head near the top rope, and I'm about 2 feet away from him. And he says, and I quote, Bob Roop's a good guy, and it would be in your best interest to get out of the ring and forget about all this, or I'm going to put you in a hole that makes your tongue suck your dick.
Okay, that was certainly not on the original broadcast. I didn't realize he said that. Wow.
Well, Bob didn't either. And I told Bob, I said, I was furious at the guy. He said, well, I am now. And then he said, I don't remember a point where Bob Orton Jr. had gone to Angelo about any of this. He didn't know if he did it on his own or whether Angelo told him to go out there and do it. So he doesn't remember that. I don't remember that. I don't know anything about that. But no, he didn't know about me getting locked up twice by the police in the back or Orton's threat. But one funny thing he said was when he talked about Angelo trying to negotiate with me about offering me $250 and $500. He said, you know what would happen? He said, if he agreed to $250, he'd come back and tell us he paid $1,000.
Interesting.
Just so he could keep the rest of the money.
Well, and that's the other thing too with Bob Orton. Bob Orton, I believe, was maybe a 10% shareholder in ICW.
Yeah.
So when he's going out to the ring, it's not just, hey, I'm protecting one of the boys, or hey, I'm trying to move the show along. It's $100 of that money comes from me. Yeah,
it was him and Ronnie Garvin, Rip Rogers, and a couple of other people had shares in that. So yeah, $100 out of their pocket. But Rip was on your show once, and he talked about the pool that they had, and that it didn't make a big deal to him because it just came out of that pool.
Right.
So I'll take his word for that.
That weekend in Florida with Barry Rose's Championship Wrestling from Florida Fan Fest, where did you leave it with Bob? Did you stay in touch with him? Did you exchange numbers?
Sent him a Facebook request. I was sitting there I showed him Travis Heckle's artwork. He loved that. And I was talking to him that morning. I was sitting there at that little bar with him, and there was another guy there. And I got one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten, and probably one of the best stories from him that I've ever gotten. The best compliment I ever got was that some guy was asking him about what Bob thought would be, let me see how I can put this, what you have to do to make it in professional wrestling today. And when Bob and I talked about my training prior to that more in depth, so he knew about it. And Bob looked at the guy and he pointed his finger at me and said, you'd have to train like that guy. And I just took that as a tremendous compliment.
Yeah.
And after a couple of people had left and we were sitting there by ourselves, one of the things that, and I don't think he'll mind me telling this, it was kind of a personal thing, but I want to let everybody know what a personable and thoughtful guy he is, was that we talked for an hour in this panel. And everybody liked it. I got a lot of handshakes and people telling me it was a great story. But sitting down there with him the next morning, he said, when we got done last night, me and my son, his son was there with him. He said, me and my son went back to the hotel room. And he said, when we got back up there, his son asked him to show him what the sugar hole was. And he said, that's the first time in 25 years he's ever asked me to do that.
Oh, wow.
And I could see this huge smile on his face because it was just this tremendous bonding moment for them. And if I take nothing else away from this, I'll remember that, because it's just, the whole thing has just been this tremendous thing. just from something that happened 37 years ago, what is now considered a dark house show. And it's gotten to this, and it's kind of brought it full circle. And that was a tremendous little story from him. And I said, did you stretch him? he said, a little bit.
Of course he did. But here we are as we begin to wrap things up. I'm sure you have something you'd like to say to some of the listeners, because I know so many people have reached out to you. I hear from so many people to this day to ask about or talk about the Sugar Hole Challenge segment. Anything you want to say to the 605ers out there?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for all the love and getting to meet so many great people. Getting to meet Jim Cornette, that was tremendous. Listening to all the other segments, like, where Austin Idol has talked about it, Ron Fuller, heard of Carl Stern talking to George Weingroff from an interview from 2009. All the fans that are on the Mothership page, that has been amazing. And I've loved making friends with them. And I met a lot of the 605ers down there in Florida and all around this area. It's just been a tremendous thing for me. It's been uplifting. I've had kind of a tough year physically, and that has kept me on an even keel. And I really appreciate all the love and thank everybody for all the support. And I'm glad you liked the story. And just come up and say hi if you see me out somewhere.
There he is, the Sugar Hole champion himself, William Harding, and I'm sure you'll hear him on the show again at some point in the future. If you see him at a wrestling event, please go say hello and shake his hand. William Harding, a good friend of the show here at the Super Podcast. Speaking of friends of the Super Podcast, this next segment, Kurt, is one I think you're going to really love hearing. I think the listeners will really love as well. Our friend Dan Farron, the late Dan Farron, is here on the show once again, and he's going to discuss one of the great tag teams of all time. We could argue where they are in terms of West Coast tag teams in history, Gordman and Goliath. Where do you stand on Gordman and Goliath, Kurt?
My single favorite tag team in the history of wrestling, and it's just an atrocity that footage of them in their prime, that not much of it exists. They were some of the most perfect heels I've ever seen. The second match I ever went to in 1974 was them versus Tony Rocco and La Pantera Negra, and they could lead that crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra. They knew how to get the people pissed off. They knew how to make both Rocco and Pantera Negra shine to the point where this 12-year-old kid really thought the titles were about to change. That's how much they were selling for the baby faces. And Black Gordman is one of the 5 best heels I have ever seen in my life, and they are the best tag team I've ever seen.
What'd you think of the Twin Devils?
I like them too. The only thing is I wish we had gotten them maybe 10 years earlier when they were more in their prime. Anybody who watched their matches, they were still good, but they were definitely guys in their 40s, and you could tell that they were hurting a little. But it's amazing they kept them heels for so long before turning them babyface, because San Bernardino Arena, people would come up to get the occasional autograph from the baby faces, but when the Twin Devils came, people would swarm over there because the Twin Devils were one of the few who would actually take time and chat it up with, the fans, even the silliest fan. They were very, very, they just seemed like very nice guys.
Speaking of nice guys, let's now go to He's Still Alive, the late Dan Farron, talking about...
Twice resurrected Dan Farron, you have returned.
Let's go now to Dan Farron on Gordman and Goliath. I am very happy to welcome back to the Super Podcast today someone who has been a great guest and a great co-host on the program. He is your friend and mine, the late Dan Farron. Dan, welcome back to the program.
Hello, Brian. It's great to be back. It's always good to be back for another edition of Late and Great, and that's what we're here for.
Another edition of Late and Great. I want to make a little bit of a comment here at the beginning. Usually you have much better audio. You're actually dealing with the heat has been so excessive where you are in California that, what did you call it? Power hits, that the power keeps going in and out.
We get power hits. So unfortunately, we've had a couple today, and I'm afraid that we'll get started and we'll take a hit and we'll lose internet. So, unfortunately, we have to do it with good old AT&T today.
Well, speaking of taking a hit, recently on the program, Howard Baum was on the show, and he said that he always wondered why Great Goliath, of course, of the famous Black Gordman and Great Goliath tag team, why was Goliath called Goliath? He was a small guy, not necessarily big or imposing. And I said, you know what? I actually know someone who is an expert on Gordman and Goliath, one of their biggest fans, someone who saw them countless amounts of times. And that, of course, is you, Dan Farron. So here you are on the Super Podcast once again. And I'm going to kind of leave it to you to explain Gordman and Goliath to someone who may put them into a YouTube search and see maybe them in a tag match against Inoki and, I don't know, Sakaguchi or someone, or them in a handicap match against Andre the Giant, and not truly get who they were, why they were important to Southern California wrestling, and just how good they were.
Well, I think it goes even beyond the fact that they were important to Southern California wrestling. I think they were important to wrestling in general. Because they basically encompass many different styles. I say this to Howard. I've seen Black Gordman and the Great Goliath wrestle in person probably more times than any other tag team in my life. In fact, when I was going to the San Bernardino Arena on a weekly basis back in 1974, 75, I probably saw them at least 40 or 50 times just in about a year and a half. They are my favorite tag team of all time. And I think that what happens with them often is you take a look at them, and maybe they're not the most imposing physical team you might see. They just look like a couple of guys you might find hanging out in the corner or doing that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, and let's take the Great Goliath. Okay, you don't have to be a large person to be referred to as a Goliath, as somebody who's larger than life. Because Great Goliath, for most of us out here, was larger than life. Now, I don't know where the name came from. Like a lot of guys, he wound up adopting that when he was down in Mexico before he came up here. But the fact of the matter is that Great Goliath was one of the toughest guys that I ever saw in the ring. And I've seen him with people when somebody would give him a potato, and he'd be very quick to return the receipt. He and Gordman were both very, very tough wrestlers. And in fact, a lot of the guys that worked with them, from the people I've talked to over the years, some liked working with them. Some guys didn't like working with them, because the fact was, like a lot of the old school guys, with Gordman and Goliath, if they did not like working with you in the ring, they wouldn't give you a lot. They wouldn't bump a lot for you. If they respected you and liked you, they would work with you. But God forbid that you do anything in the ring to either one of them that they didn't appreciate, because you can take a look at you can see a guy sometime on the street, and maybe he doesn't look all that tough, but if he were to get into a fight, he would rip somebody from limb to limb. And the thing about Great Goliath was that the man very rarely spoke in the interviews. He was very, very tough. But he was one of those guys where I've seen him take jobbers apart, and he was constantly chewing gum, and he never lost a chew in that entire time. During interviews, during matches, whatever, he would just beat the living daylights out of you. So, they may not have, physical specimens like a lot of guys were, but these guys were as tough and as rough as can be. And I think a lot of good tag teams, they both were different in their own ways. Gordman was working as a vendor in Mexico when he first broke into wrestling. He was always kind of the cocky guy. He was the guy that handled most of the interviews. Goliath had a very, very rough childhood. He was one of 11 children living in Mexico. His family was so poor. His father was a bricklayer, that he used to go down when he was like 9 or 11 or whatever, and he would dig up sand and bring it back up to the house, and the kids would make the bricks that the father was going to go out and lay. So from a very early, a very early time, Goliath was really, really, forced into being an adult and to taking care of himself. So sometimes, you might not be the biggest guy in the entire fight, but you are a guy who's gone through a lot, and you just basically, to put it bluntly, you just don't take shit from anybody. And he started out, Goliath did, as a driver for a famous Mexican wrestler named Gorilla Ramos, and eventually got into the business. It's interesting because he and Gordman, their lives paralleled for quite some time. And that is, they both were down in Mexico. They both started wrestling in the 60s. They were about 5 years apart in age. Gordman had it, I wouldn't say easier, but he was much more of a social guy. He was a partier. He was a guy that liked to have a good time. Goliath was always a family man. He'd do the job, he'd do his work, and then he'd go home to his family. And they started out wrestling separately. And when they first came to the LA area around 1970. They did work separately. Gordman wrestled with Bull Ramos and Pepper Gomez as his partner for a while. Goliath came in after that. They were matched up. I never asked Jeff Walton, I should, about what the science was behind putting them together, except that they looked like they'd be a good team. But what I always liked about watching Gordman and Goliath was that they really were adaptable. They, no matter what style and what different kinds of wrestlers they were working with, they would always they could always adapt to whatever style. And if you look at the guys that they worked with over the years, out here they worked with the Guerreros, and up north they worked with Kenji Shibuya and Masa Saito. But they also wrestled in the Central States in Texas and Georgia, and they were wrestling guys like Pat O'Connor there, and Ted and Jerry Oates, and Dick Slater and Mark Lewin, and Bob Armstrong and Mr. Wrestling 2. So, those are all very different wrestlers. They all had to have, and you had to adapt to whatever style they were going to do. They were fast, they were crisp. If they liked you, they bumped a lot. And there's a clip that everybody could see that's on the WWE Network and on YouTube, where they were doing this test of strength thing with Andre the Giant, where they had two teams on each side of him, like in a tug of war. And at the last second, they're pulling on his arms, and Andre, flicks and wins the tug of war. Goliath even took the bump for the tug of war. I mean, any guy that would take a bump for a tug of war, I think, is somebody that they have to respect. And that's what I liked about it. They could do, when you talk about that match that's famous, and you see it all over the place, the handicap match with Andre the Giant. They played that all over the place, and there's a reason why that survives to this day. It is probably one of the best Andre handicap matches you will ever see, because it starts off as comedy, and Black Gorman and Great Goliath could do comedy spots. They would try to shake hands, and Andre would squeeze their hand, and then they would beg off, and they would do all the big bumps going outside the ring, and then they basically got their act together and they started double teaming Andre, and then Andre made the comeback and beat both of them. But there was no way that after that match was over that you would think any less of Gordman and Goliath at that point. They did what the old time guys were supposed to do, and that was they got the guy over. And it didn't matter if they lost, because they were able to retain their heat after a while. When Goliath first started wrestling, the great story is that his payoff for his very first match was a 6-pack of Coca-Cola. And probably working for Mike LaBelle, it probably didn't get much higher than that over the years. But he was kind of like the Arn Anderson. He was the quiet guy that could do all the stuff while Gordman did all the flashy stuff. Yeah, I always enjoyed all those years of watching it, and I got to see them 74, 75, which was probably their peak time. They were just so great. They could start a riot in the ring quicker than anybody else. And even when they turned face a couple times, they did an angle in the mid '70s, a kind of ill-fated thing when Louis Tilley was booking out here. Louis Tilley was supposed to be an NWA representative, and he got into a feud with the Hollywood Blondes and Sir Oliver Humperdinck. So Tilley brought Gorman and Goliath back. They had been gone for several months as faces, and they feuded with the Hollywood Blondes. Those were some really great matches going back and forth. And then after the Blondes left, they brought in J.C. Dykes and the Infernos. And this was, I believe this was J.C. Dykes and the Inferno's last run in a major market. I've always heard stories that there were a lot of demons bothering Dykes at that time, and he and the guys split up after that. But they did this angle. I never forgot this, and they repeated it all around the Horn. They burned Goliath with a fireball, and that left Gorman alone for a couple weeks. And J.C. Dykes and the Infernos would go to the arenas, even if they weren't scheduled for the show. And at some point between the matches, J.C. Dykes would march up and down the aisle with his whistle, blowing the whistle, and he would hand out a piece of paper in Spanish and in English that said, "Black Gorman and the Great Goliath are yellow." And Gorman would always come down, and start to chase J.C. Dykes, and then the Infernos would jump in, and Dykes would paintbrush Gorman with the flyers. I got to tell you, there were only 2 security guards at the San Bernardino Arena. And I don't know how a riot didn't break out that night when they started doing it, because even when the Gorman and Goliath were wrestling as heels, it was kind of like they were still the hometown heels. The people still kind of liked them, even though they would go after them and yell at them and do stuff like that. But they were still the hometown boys, and they were ready to climb into the ring and go after Dykes and the Infernos that night because of the fact that they just were just so irritated at them. So, I mean, that's just, like I said, just because they may not have looked like the toughest guys in the world. Great Goliath was called great, not because of his stature. He was called great because of who he was and what he could do.
We just recently had Jeff Walton on the show talking a little bit about the WWA in the 1960s, some of the champions that really don't get talked about much, from Pedro Morales to Mark Lewin to even Iron Mike DiBiase. A lot of people forget he was the world champion out there in LA. What was the tag team scene like? Before Gordman and Goliath get together, you said they both get there, I think, 69, 1970. Eventually they get put together as a tag team. And it just seems like such a natural fit. When you see pictures of them together, it just seems like a natural tag team. What was tag team wrestling like in LA before Gordman and Goliath?
It was interesting. I mean, there were they used to put a lot of guys together, not on a regular basis. You know, when you work like in Memphis or other places, you get 2 guys and maybe they were kind of floundering for a while or whatever, and they would create a tag team for them and push them strictly as a tag team. I never really looked at the Los Angeles area as being a tag team territory. It was mostly a singles territory. And they would team people together for a short period of time, but usually it was because they were going to turn somebody on against somebody, or they were going to take someone and break up the team eventually, or do something like that. So you had like these little teams that, in general, for a while, like you might have Neil Mascaris and Chavo Guerrero, or you might have Freddie Blassie, and they did a stunt thing once or twice where they had him team with Tolis, but it wasn't really a real. There were teams like the Medics, and sometimes they would bring in teams like Anjo Blanco and Dr. Wagner, the originals from Mexico. But in general, they would do things like they would take Man Mountain Mike, who was a face, and they turned him heel, and they teamed him up with Butcher Brannigan, who was a middle of the card guy, Joe Nova. And they would win the belt, and they would wrestle around for about a month and a half, and then they would decide to turn Brannigan face and have him go up against Mike. And so the tag teams didn't really last for a long period of time, unless you were something like the Guerrero brothers or something that had some cemented bond between them. Gordman and Goliath didn't always have real strong, solid opponents sometimes. I mean, Shibuya and Saito were a great team. I never got a chance to see them, unfortunately. That feud was over with by the time I got here. But when I saw them from the mid-'70s on, they were in a situation where they were going up against a lot of the local guys, and they weren't always the biggest names. And I always felt like the guys got a little, not so much stale, but they got a little bored sometimes. So that's why they would all of a sudden go off and work in Texas, or go off and work in the Central States, or go to New Japan, where they had a lot of success there on a regular basis. They wrestled under hoods for a while as the Asian Terrors. And actually, there's a great match on YouTube which has them under hoods against Inoki and Choshu. And that is always the match I use whenever anybody says to me, well, Jake Roberts created the DDT first. I always say, you go 4 minutes in on this match, and you see Black Gorman do the DDT twice on Choshu, just exactly the same way that Jake Roberts did it. So, I mean, I felt like they sometimes, they wouldn't go far because they had families here, but they would, on occasion, I think, get bored because the competition was not great and head off to other areas.
How much heat did they have at their peak? And also, when they finally did turn babyface, when they were brought back as babyfaces, how did the fans accept them?
Well, they didn't turn babyface. They did things over the years where a couple times prior to when I was here, they tried to do a Gorman-Goliath feud, and it was kind of like the Hardy feud they talk about now. The fans just really didn't want to see them wrestle each other. So what they would do is when they brought them back, they brought them back as faces. There wasn't any big incident that caused a turn. But Gorman and Goliath, as a lot of the guys do, just wrestled the same way as faces as they did as heels. They were not above cheap heat. They would curse in Spanish and yell out and things like that or whatever. Of course, the biggest heat generator, which is talked about all the time, was when they had Jimmy Lennon introduce them as being from New Mexico, because they didn't want anything to do with the Mexicans. They would yell, "Sit down, Mexican," "Shut up, Mexican," like that to people in the crowd. And that would just basically set them off. But I think this is something that I think that happened a lot with territories in the old days all over the place. And that is, you had the guys that were always kind of there. They might be faces for a while. They might be heels for a while. But like I said, they were homegrown guys. They were like the local team. And even if they turned face or heel, deep down, the fans kind of respected them and liked them, and it was something they were familiar with. So if somebody new came from out of the area and was feuding with them, they may cheer for the other team a little bit, but deep down they respected the guys. And I very rarely ever saw anybody jump through the ropes and go after Gorman and Goliath. It's just that no one was that stupid to do that. I've seen it done on other situations. I saw somebody go after Crusher Verdue one time, but no one ever went up against Gorman and Goliath because they knew what was going to happen. They were not going to take it easy. In fact, at one point, I think the Hollywood Blondes had gotten so much heat that they actually got a local wrestler to jump through the ropes on TV and go after the Blondes, and they basically grabbed the guy and worked him over and busted him open in an effort to show fans not to do this in case something like that were to happen. The reason I think it didn't really completely work is because the guy took bumps. When he get hit, he would take a bump, and the minute that happens, you can hear the moan go up through the entire arena. Oh, this is not real. This is one of them, doing that. But you can find a lot of great stuff. I suggest to people that you can find a lot of interesting stuff around there. There was at one point, after the territory went out of business in '82, the guys kind of hung around for a while. And when McMahon came into the area not long after that, he did use a lot of the guys on the undercards for the original there's still 3 W's, WWE shows back then. And Gorman and Goliath were guys that they would bring in. And they had they decided to run the Olympic Auditorium one time, and they brought in as the undercard any of the guys that had worked in California, plus they had Wildman Jack Armstrong and Irish Mickey Doyle and Gorman and Goliath and John Tolos on the undercard. And it was really funny because it had to be frustrating for the guys working on the show from the WWF at that time, was because everybody knew the local guys. All the fans were cheering for the local guys, no matter who they wrestled against. John Tolos wrestled against Tony Gurria, and he was supposed to be the heel. The fans cheered for John Tolos. So they basically had looked again. They looked at the guys as these are our home guys. You guys are the outsiders, and you can be the face or you can be the heel, but we're still going to support our guys in the long run.
How did Gorman and Goliath get along with the other wrestlers, with the other Mexican wrestlers, and of course with the LA office?
I always felt that from what I've been told from the other guys is that, and actually I have had situations where I have spoken, I did speak to Goliath on a couple of occasions. Gorman always kind of disappeared whenever that happened. But afterwards, when the territory closed, and he was always a very gentle man, a very quiet man, and they both were very respectful of the business. And that is like the old school guys, they did not tell tales out of school. But some of the guys were not happy with him because they didn't since they were originally trained in lucha, they sometimes took big bumps and did stuff like that. And some of the guys, there's that old school mentality that it wasn't really, it was more of a lucha thing, and it was a little too big of a bump. It needed to be a little more realistic. But I never heard stories of anyone not thinking these guys were professional, especially since Goliath spent a lot of time after his career ended training guys out here in Southern California, lucha guys and other guys like that. A lot of guys have a tendency to look at Goliath as being like a father figure out here. When he retired, he had several heart attacks before he eventually passed away, and he retired like in the mid-90s. And he started running a school in San Bernardino at the San Bernardino Arena, and that's where actually Billy Anderson and Jesse Hernandez's school grew out of that. And he would put on shows with the different students and whatever. And He also spent some time working for Alex Knight, who was a local enhancement guy here who had a license in the 1990s. And, you could always bring in Goliath to work on a lucha show or on a regular show, and it always kind of like raised the level of the competition. I was working on this one show, and I was the commissioner, and Alex Knight was supposed to wrestle Goliath in the main event, and they had me do an angle in the ring where I did a contract signing. And I went up to Goliath back in the dressing room and said, "Is there anything you need, whatever?" And he was just very quiet. And so I was like, "No, I'm fine. We'll just, just follow whatever we do." And I did that. And that's one of those moments for me also as a fan. I was standing in the middle of the ring and I look over and there's this moment and I paused because in my head I was saying, I can't believe I'm standing in the ring with a great Goliath right now. But they eventually broke off and went their different ways. Gorman stayed for a while and worked on the Red Bastien Win tapings. He wrestled under a mask again, and I think that the idea was that Conan was on the show, and they were going to try to build some sort of mask versus mask match. But that never went anywhere, and that's the last time that I've seen Gorman out here. Like I said, Goliath ran the school for the longest time, worked a lot of local shows, and then he eventually moved up to Las Vegas, and he passed away there about 10 or so years ago. But Gorman's still alive, and Gorman actually is going to be 83 this year, so that has to put him on the short list of the longest surviving professional wrestlers that are still around from the old days.
Did they get along?
I think they had their moments. I think they got along pretty much so. I don't think they were tight. I don't think they were close. Like I said, Gorman wanted to go off and go do, and kind of party a little bit and do stuff like that. And Goliath was a home buddy. Goliath wanted to go home to his family and didn't feel any great need to do that. I never heard stories about them hanging out together or anything like that. I think they realized that they were good for business for each other. But when the time came into the 1990s, when it was time to go their separate ways, they went their separate ways. And there's one story that's if I can correct that, when Eddie Ihorn died a couple of years ago, Dave Meltzer did an article on the IWA, and they mentioned that Goliath had worked there, which is not true. He actually didn't. There was another guy that looked a lot like Scott Irwin that was actually on the tapes that wrestled as Goliath there. But by that time, Goliath was happy to be in the area here with his family and his grandchildren, and he did not want to go out any place. But I think, I never felt that Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey hung out a lot together, or a lot of the guys hung out a lot together outside when they were working. And I think they were friendly, but I think it was basically a good business decision for both of them. One thing that I am pleased about is there is a lot, not to say a lot, but there is quite a bit of video that's up on YouTube and around that people can watch a little bit. There's some old 8mm Olympic Auditorium stuff from the 70s that's up on YouTube. On the WWE Network and up there, you can also see the time that Black Gorman went to Madison Square Garden and wrestled Victor Rivera. And there's actually a weird little clip in the early 1960s. A very young Black Gorman appeared in the Treasure of Dracula, Santo movie, and you can actually find his match with Santo on YouTube. And there's a couple great ones from New Japan, and there was at one point, and I haven't seen her for a while, but there was a world-class match that had Kerry Von Erich versus Black Gorman. And that was really interesting because, again, you talk about adopting your style for the persons you worked with. I mean, Gorman knew that he was there to put over the promoter's kid, and that's what he did. He made the promoter's kid look good, but he didn't flop around or make himself look bad. And that's the thing that I always admired about them. They were really professional guys. They really, really knew what had to be done. They were very protective of the business. And I think that I hope that the guys don't wind up being forgotten. And it makes me feel good to know that people are asking about them from time to time. And, like I said, I hope that people realize that maybe they didn't look like the fiercest two guys in the entire world, but they were two of the best wrestlers together as a team, and my favorite tag team of all time.
There he is, friend of the show, Dan Farron. I'm sure you'll be hearing him back on the show pretty soon. I'm sure you'll be hearing him actually in the co-host chair again pretty soon because I really enjoyed that time he was in the co-host chair a little while back here. But with that, Kurt, let's now move on to a conversation, part of the continuing conversation between myself and Jerry Gray. Of course, Jerry is battling stage 4 cancer. If you'd like to help him out, if you enjoy these segments on the show, every dollar helps. You can go to tinyurl.com/GoFund Golden Boy. Every dollar helps. Medical bills, food, whatever it is, Jerry's depleted his funds. He could really use everyone's help. If you enjoyed this segment, consider lending a hand and helping Jerry out. But let's now go to this segment. Jerry will be talking about Japan and, of course, Jake the Snake Roberts, as well as other topics. Let's go to the Golden Boy, Jerry Gray. We are back here again this week with Jerry Gray, and actually Jerry and I were just having an off-air conversation, and I stopped it mid-sentence, and I said, let's just start recording. Let's get this on the air. So I'll ask you the question that we were talking about right when I said, hold on, let's just stop. When you were over in Japan, what percentage of the Japanese press, the Japanese wrestling press, spoke English?
The main one I remember, and now I can't even remember his name, who's the guy that always came here and hung with all the Kurt Hang and all of them, Jimmy Suzuki?
Jimmy Suzuki, yeah.
Yeah, I remember him really good, but they spoke pretty good English, actually. Even the fans did, because I used to let a lot of the young kid fans in my room, because all the other Americans would be real mean to them, you know. I'd end up having like 10 of them in my room hanging with me. There's a lot of the Japanese fans and probably photographers too. Everybody really was hanging with me. But yeah, they spoke good English, even the kids did back then.
How would you explain that? How would you explain the relationship you could have over there as a gaijin with the Japanese fans?
I felt sorry for them because, I mean, these guys were really, like Rick Steiner would shake their hand and then you could hear the bones popping like little kids squeezing their hand so hard.
Little kids?
I told them, knock it off. Oh, yeah. Any kid. He didn't care who it was. And he'd just squeeze their hand hard as he could. And then they'd hand him, the nice pitcher like they do, the presents or whatever. He'd throw it like a Frisbee. And I was like, man, you're not going to get heat over here. There's no reason to do that stuff. They're not going to boo you. A lot of those guys did that though, and then I'd end up having them in my room though, and then they'd take me to those Japanese wrestling stores, because there was no such thing back then in America.
Yeah,
I was really getting into that. It was cool.
What was that like for you though? Here you are, you're someone who grew up a wrestling fan. You're in the wrestling business, but you're still a fan, and all of a sudden you find out there's a store, and then you go up in there. What was that experience like?
Oh, yeah, I had all the kids walking with me and took me over there. Oh, it was awesome. And then they actually recognized me, the people, because there's not many Americans walking around, big guys. And then they gave me, some stuff free, the people that owned the store. Some of the, keychains and stuff, New Japan. Well, I can't even remember a bunch of stuff, though. But those kids were really awesome. They'd give me all kinds of nice, they'd always call your room no matter what time it was. And I have a present for you. And then I'd be like, oh, God, I'm sleeping. Well, okay, come on up. And then I would let them in. Everybody else would be telling them, get out of here. Don't call my room no more. But then, yeah, it was cool, though. I got pictures of them still, too. They gave me, like 10 kids standing there with me in my room and everything. It was funny. All the Americans would be like, what are you hanging with them punks for? I'd be like, man, I like wrestling. You guys might not, but I do. But anyway, yeah, it was cool, though. Plus, they'd help me, too, ordering stuff, because back then, I don't know how it is now, but, you couldn't order anything in the restaurants in some of those little towns, and the kids would go in there and speak Japanese for me and order, make sure it's cooked and whatever it is, the food, make sure I'm not getting some kind of weird animal or something.
Did you go to Ribera, the steakhouse?
I never went there. I was too cheap. I was like, I'm not paying them that much money. I was trying to save money because everything costs enough, the prices. But I did find some smaller. If you just walk out of the hotels and stuff, even in Tokyo, you can find really good, restaurants for good prices and everything. But I didn't ever go there for some reason. A lot of those guys didn't go. I think it was All Japan went more than the New Japan guy, seems like. Because all the guys were cheap on the tours I'd be on, like Murdoch and all them. He probably been there a million times already. But he wasn't wanting to spend no money on nothing. He had sponsors and the gangsters or whatever paying for everything. I even had a couple of those guys too. They call them gangsters, but Yakuza. And then, if they're a fan of yours or whatever, they'd take you to pay for everything. And then that was funny because one time they just wanted me to come. And I was kind of nervous. I think it was the first time I was ever there. And I was thinking, man, this is kind of weird. I don't want to go with just them only. They're going to blow me away or something. And they're missing the fingers and everything. And then I said, can I have some other guys come with me? I think it was every time I went there, I wanted some other guy to come with me. Like, and they were like, "No, we just want you." And I said, "Come on, bring the sheep herders with me." It was funny because they were like, "No, they're not good, no good technique and all that. It doesn't matter. They're nice guys." They hated them. I was like, "They're nice guys. Come on, bring them to my friends." And then they finally brought them. And it was funny though because the guy was mad the whole time. I don't want them. And then and I was like, "They're big stars and NGs in America." But anyway, they would pay for everything. The crews would give you all kinds of presents and everything, and I'd get all my stuff away to sheep herders or whoever, because they'd give me like real expensive sake, and I didn't drink, so I'd be like giving all my presents back to sheep herders or whoever wanted to drink. It was funny.
Was it kayfabe or was it not kayfabe, the relationship you had with any of the fans or any of the sponsors over there?
You mean, you talking like...
I mean, if they're all in your room talking to you, are you shooting with them, or are you telling them what's really going on, or are you keeping kayfabe?
No, they don't even ask anything like that. They're just like thrilled to be. The main thing they just want to do is just look at you, and you know, they didn't even ask anything like that at all. Like, "Oh, is it real?" Never. Not one time. Nobody ever asked me like anything like that. No, they mainly just they had all their cameras, you know, the kids, and they'd bring like belts. I didn't even see stuff like that back then either. Like the imitation belts they had over there. They had like an NWA belt, like it looked just like it. The kids did, and put it on me and took pictures of it. I still have a picture of that somewhere. One of them kids gave me. I remember one kid always say, "You remember me? I'm Nagoya Boy." I always remember his name, Nagoya Boy. But yeah, I'm sure I met the Saito, the one that was just on your show, because I mean, I'm sure if he was working for, which magazine did you say he worked for?
Fumi Saito was with Weekly Pro Wrestling throughout the 80s.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I did. See, they made a signed contract too, like real thick contracts that said you're not allowed to do any interviews with any of that stuff. You know, New Japan did.
Get out of here.
You're not allowed to talk. Yeah, you're not allowed to talk to. I mean, like one of the big things they had in the contract, it said you're not allowed to do any. Yeah, so I don't think I ever did really talk to them. They might have took pictures of the matches or something, but yeah, they had signed stuff like that saying no photographer, no interviews unless they have, you know, assign you to it or whatever. New Japan, yeah. Yeah, I was going to tell you too. The first time I ever worked for New Japan really was when they flew me over to Honolulu, Hawaii for that. Was that Aloha Stadium, that big one? Yeah. Me and Muta, they flew over from Tampa, and then I'd never even worked for New Japan yet, but I already had a date that one of the scouts came over and picked me to come over. I can't remember his name, but he worked for Anuki and Sakaguchi. Anyway, he picked me to come, and then they sent me to Honolulu with Muta to work with him. And it was weird because it was like 1 million people in the dressing room because Lars Anderson ran it with Maivia. What's her name?
Leah Maivia.
Yeah, her. They ran it though, and then I guess Anuki was some kind of partnership with. Yeah, I can't remember.
Rock's grandmother, otherwise known as.
Yeah, I think he was standing there too, Rock, a little kid with an afro. But anyway, it was like everybody was on that show. I mean, there were so many guys. I don't know how they even, because the crowd, I don't know how many place held, but it wasn't really. It didn't look that good to me because it was like a huge place, you know. But Anuki was partners with them on the show for some reason. I don't even know what that was all about, but everybody was on the show. Like I said, the original Sheik was there, Brody, everybody, Mark Lewin, plus a bunch of guys from the United States, like Mondo Guerrero, everybody. I mean, there must have been, I think that Tom Hankton might have even been there too, because there were so many people you couldn't even meet them all. I mean, there was every name. Uncle Elmer was there, Lawler, 1 million people. I don't know how they paid, but the weirdest thing was I got like $1,400 for that, just that one match.
Who paid you, New Japan or the office?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sakaguchi, New Japan. But the weirdest thing was I ended up being in the clique with them because I flew with Muta, and I didn't know. I mean, I had never met any of those guys yet, Brody or any of them. So then I ended up sitting with, and I didn't know what a god Anuki was. Like I heard later stories, like even big names say that they'd rush him in. They never even got to talk to him. Like some of the real big names would say, like Anuki just came in with an entourage at the arena, and then they'd rush him in and out, and nobody really got to talk to him. But I sat there right there with him.
He's Mick Jagger.
Yeah, I know.
What it comes down to.
He was.
Yeah.
That's why it was so weird.
He still is. That's the thing.
I know. And I was sitting there right there with him. I didn't even know all these stories. I'd just seen him when I was a kid in Ohio against Johnny Powers, you know, but I didn't know he was that huge like that. And then he was sitting there, though, right next to me, Muda, Sakaguchi, just all the Japanese and me in this one section. You know, nobody came near him. And then it was so weird because he was actually talking to me perfect English, telling me, like, this is the Japanese style. You're getting ready to come here. I mean, he don't usually talk to anybody, like, really. And then I didn't realize what he was really doing. I mean, really, that was like not unheard of what he was doing, helping me, like telling me, like, when you come here, when you come to Japan in 2 months, whatever, to do this, you're doing good, but just a little bit faster, it's a little bit stiffer. Don't worry about the audience. They're not going to boo and everything. And then he told me a lot of stuff. And then the weirdest thing was Fujinami was a huge name, like number 2, babyface probably. He's over there taking Anuki's boots off for him, unlacing them. And I'd never heard the customs, they had like that.
Yeah, that's
so
what
I kind of
Anuki was
started
doing for Ricky Dozan.
Yeah, and I started laughing though. I was sitting right next to him. I thought it was like a joke because I never seen nothing like it. What the hell? The guy taking his boots off for him. And I started kind of laughing a little bit. And then they should have told me, Nagasaki and Muda, this is kind of stuff you're going to expect, But I was just like, oh my God. I kind of laughed and then I figured it out, oh shit. Because Anuki told him to quit when I laughed. And then I was like, oh God, I know now not to do that again. And then it was just weird, though, because I was like, oh, my God, it's that much respect. Jesus. Even the big star. I mean, it's not like the young boy. Fujinami was a huge name, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, I couldn't believe the payoff for that horrible crowd. And I was like, and then they asked me what I got. And that's the one thing I learned, too. Don't ever tell anybody else what you get, Because Mondo Guerrero was there, and I heard they were getting like $50 and stuff. I don't even know where they came there, that far from wherever they live, California or whatever. Well, I guess Hawaii, but still for $50. He was like, man, you come all the way from Florida. He said, it's horrible payoffs here. I was like, oh, they already paying me like cash, like $1,200, whatever it was, $1,400. And he was like, what? He got so mad. He was like, what? I was like, oh shit, no more telling that. I remember Tom Pritchard got mad at me too because I didn't understand. They shouldn't ask you though either. It's like put you on the spot. Back in Oregon,
Yeah.
Don Owens paid so good for the main event, but the first match or whatever would get like, for the Portland Sports Arena, there'd be like, I forget how many, 2,000 or 3,000 people packed in that bowling alley, and then if you're in the main event, though, the payoff was totally different. I got like $400 just for that Saturday night because me and Tom Pritchard were the main event against somebody, Rip Oliver and Ken Nagasaki, I think. And then Mondo was like in the first matches or whatever, and we all rode together. And then Mondo said, how much you guys get last night? And I was like, 400. And he went, what? I got $80. And then Pritchard looked at me like, shit, don't tell him that, man. And I was like, what? Jeez, we're all friends. What the hell? But I couldn't believe the difference.
It's always Mondo, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Mondo again, yeah. But he always was asking. Yeah, Mondo the troublemaker? No. But he was always asking how much the pay was. A lot of guys didn't ask that, but it's like I usually told them, but then I learned, though, don't tell people anymore because you're going to start a bunch of crap, So anyway, yeah, Pritchard told me, don't tell him that, man. It hurt his feelings. So I was like, well, shit, what am I going to tell him?
Were you around Chavo much?
Yeah, we didn't get along too good.
No?
It was me and somebody. I got along with all the other ones, but one time it was just because I was like, he's been in Japan all those times, and he'd always complain about my side salto because he said that he come out of the dressing room and said, save that shit for Japan, man. You drove me into the mat. No. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? A side suplex? What the hell? Side salto, And I was like, I didn't like him too good after that. I was like, God, what a wimp. I mean, it was how can you hurt somebody with a side suplex? I mean, Jesus. Yeah, and then he was always complaining about something. I wasn't around him a whole lot, but yeah, he was good to work with, but it was just the complaining part afterwards. I forgot about the whiny stuff with him, too, with humongous stories last time. But anyway, yeah, I couldn't believe he complained about that all the times he'd been in Japan. I was like, you got to be kidding me. You think that hurts? Jeez. Yeah, I remember one time, too, I was going to tell you about Rick Steiner, something he did. Dr. Death had him. It was his first tour ever over there. Rick Steiner, and me and Dr. Death had already been there a bunch, and then Dr. Death had him all, psyched up and everything to kill everybody and hurt them and everything, and then they were actually shooting in the dressing rooms, too. Like, there was amateur pads in some of the locker rooms, and Dr. Death and Steiner were doing, like, shoot matches, and Steiner came out on top every time, pretty much.
Really?
I remember Bushwhackers. Yeah, Bushwhackers remember that too. He was telling me that not too long ago. He remembered that. And I was like, what the hell? Steiner was, he was huge then, though. Remember Steiner's shoulders and everything.
Yeah.
And Doc had already been in pro wrestling for a while, Holder and everything. So anyway, yeah, he told Steiner, do this, hurt all these guys, and you don't get that. I mean, you don't go that far. Just if they try to test you, then you beat him up a little bit. I mean, he was actually trying to, I don't know if he broke the guy's neck or something he did to this guy, because Doc told him, hurt this guy, some short guy. I can't remember his name. You might not even know him. He wasn't a big name, but he was older, Hoshinaka or something like that. I can't remember his name, but it was in all the magazines. It showed like a series of pictures where how he dropped him straight on his neck and broke his neck. Steiner did this guy. First tour ever.
And it was because Dr. Death told him to?
Yeah, Dr. Death. And you never know back then why. I mean, maybe it was like competition, for your spot. You never knew. So the guys back then, what they're up to, It's like Steiner was definitely like the same type of style as Dr. Death. But it was like, if he hurts everybody, they're not going to want to bring him back because they didn't really like him too good. I remember Rick Steiner the first time he was there because he was hurting everybody. And then he was jackass too, Rick was, because we hung around a lot. And then Maeda was, they'd always be in the hallways of the locker rooms and stuff with all their, the UWF guys with all their, kickboxing pads and all that stuff. And Maeda and Takada and all them be out there kicking the pads, and Maeda's out there. And I'd already been there before. Maeda already liked me. And Steiner said, we were watching him kick the pad, and Steiner said, Jerry said, you're a pussy or something to Maeda. And Maeda just looked at him, though, because he knew he already knew me from a couple of years before that, working with me all the time. And he looked at Steiner like he was going to kill him. He didn't even look at me. It was like, oh, shit, I want to see this one. But they never put him against Steiner for some reason. I would like to see that much because he hated Steiner after that. Jerry said, you're a wimp. I was like, you asshole. Shut the hell up, man.
Was he in Mid-South when you were there? Did you know him before Japan?
No. That's why I met him. I met him in I flew from Florida, and then I met him in L.A. airport. I didn't even know he was a wrestler. I never heard of him, I didn't. He was nobody then, Rick Steiner, but he was sitting there. We were both waiting for the connection to go to Tokyo from L.A., I think it was, and then I flew with bushwhackers from Tampa. That's what it was, sheep herders, and then they knew him, I guess, from Louisiana or whatever, because I didn't know who the hell he was. We were just giving each other dirty looks, he's just another passenger sitting there, I thought, waiting for the connection, and then they go, Rick or Rob or whatever they called him, and then I was like, oh, fuck, he's one of the wrestlers, Jesus. No, I never met him before. But he was everybody. He was a bully, really, to everybody on that tour. We ended up liking each other later, but he was on so many roids and everything. Then it was like freezing, snowing outside in Japan on that tour bus, and he kept leaving the windows open all the time, and all the guys were getting sick and everything because he's so hot from steroids or whatever the hell's wrong with him. And then he kept leaving the windows open on the bus, though, while we're driving, and everybody's freezing and everything. And then everybody got sick. They were scared to tell him, though. George Wells was on that tour. Who else was there? He snapped on the tour. Somebody usually cracks halfway through the tour where they finally snap and go. Yeah,
Master G.
He cracked. Yeah, he cracked in the end of it because they were being kind of, Steiner mainly was the one doing all this shit. He was sitting right behind Steiner, and he got really sick from the freezing cold coming in the window on the bus all the time. So he finally snapped at the end of the tour and he stood up on the bus and started screaming how prejudiced everybody was and everything. I remember in Dr. Death, he said, you got anything to say, Doctor? Or whatever, Doc? And he goes, Steve Williams said, take the floor, brother. You got the floor. Go ahead. I was like, damn, even Doc did this. So fuck it. Let him talk. Anyway, it was pretty funny. And then I finally told Steiner, shut the fucking window, because I didn't talk much. I was always quiet, and I yelled at him, shut the fucking window. I finally just snapped, and he shut the window, and Dr. Death said, I guess he told you, brother. And Steiner just looked like, fuck. So just like, not just let me so quiet. He's going to kill me or something. Anyway, yeah. And then he always remembered that. Oh, you fucking asshole when you get mad. Shoot the window, fucking asshole. Anyway.
He had the craziest shoulders back then, like 86, 87. Jesus. It was incredible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then we went to the gym, too, because over there, there wasn't no such thing as gyms. I mean, it was like, I don't know who the hell, this gym we'd go to, it was like more like a YMCA from the 60s or something. In Tokyo, we'd all go there, and I never seen nothing like it. Steiner would be doing, they got all the weights in the whole gym, so nobody else could even lift weights, the old men or whoever were in there, like YMCA type of, and we're all in there, sheep herders, Dr. Death, Steiner, and he's got all the, what do you have? Like, I couldn't believe it. It was like probably 315 or more than that, even behind his neck doing presses, no racks or anything. He just picked it up, put it behind his neck and started doing behind the neck presses with 315, and then he stood up on the bench and doing bent over rows with it. I mean, 315, it was like 100 pounds, like anybody else would do, and nobody else could even come near that. Dr. Death, none of them, I mean, what he was doing. We were just like, holy shit. What kind of steroids you taking, man? Jesus.
What was the deal with steroids in Japan, though? Like, in terms of American guys going over there?
Oh, shit. You wouldn't even believe some of the shit, because you could never get any pot over there. I didn't realize that when I first went there. I didn't even know what withdrawals were. I didn't think you get withdrawals from pot, I'd be there like 5 weeks or whatever.
They locked up Paul McCartney.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because because I had long hair, right when I'd get to the Japanese the Tokyo airport, they'd say, "You don't have any marijuana?" I'd be like, "No."
Or
marijuana.
they smelled you.
And no, and this is how crazy Kevin Kelly was. Nails, you know Kevin Kelly?
Kevin Walcott.
Yeah, him. I can't tell his last name, but yeah, we were good friends from Oregon. I was there with him. So then I seen him in L.A. the first time I went there. It was his first tour too, and we're flying over there. But he's had pot with him in the L.A. airport. He went to a storage room in the airport and smoked. I said, "Hell no, I ain't going. Go ahead and do it. I ain't doing that shit." He's in there smoking inside the airport, the rest of his joint or whatever. He goes, "Because you can't take it over there." I was like, "Yeah, I didn't plan on bringing anything. He crazy." So then we get all the way over there, and he's going crazy. Kevin Kelly is, because he really loves pot, you know. So the whole time he's asking the cab driver, everyone, "Where do I get marijuana, dope, drugs, blah, blah, blah," all this stuff, asking them. And they'd put their hands together like handcuffs, you know. They show the handcuffs like, and then finally he just kept asking. So this cab driver takes us to the somewhere down, what's that place called? Roppongi in Tokyo, like the. Yeah. Okay. He takes us over there and gives us a note he writes in Japanese. So we go, he drops us off at the Hard Rock Cafe, and we go in there, and it's got some kind of note. We don't know what it says. We think it's like how to get marijuana. I'm just going along with it. I can care less, really. I'm just like, I ain't getting fucking thrown in prison for this shit. So then he gives us to the waitress, and the waitress goes, "This says to take you to something." It wasn't even what he asked for, you know, marijuana. He goes, "No, I want marijuana." She goes, "What do you guys like to order?" You know, they couldn't speak real good English. He's like, "Marijuana, dope, drugs we want." And then I was like, "Man, don't say me." And then he's telling the waitress this, though, at Hard Rock, and she's looking like, "What the hell? Crazy Americans?" And then she goes, no, I don't know where you get this. No, not here. And so then we go outside, and he's asking, it was like, over there was like a lot of English girls, the hookers and stuff, and he was asking them for drugs too. "No, you can't get that here, honey." But so he was going crazy. He started smoking cigarettes finally.
Hold on, then, you know what? English, or they were actually English?
Yeah, they both. They were English girls. Like, that's why I was like, what the hell? They were from England. Like, you know, they were hookers, though, standing around there. So I was just like, what the hell? This is weird. And then, so what happened? I think that's the same tour, because Duggan came like a couple weeks into the tour. He didn't stay very long from Mid-South. He only came for 2 weeks. So then he gets there. So he's like, he had his girlfriend mail him pot to the Keo Plaza. I was like, that's fucking worse than fucking bringing it with it, seems like. But he got away with it. He had pot, and then we were all going crazy. I remember all the Americans went into the hotel room and put like towels underneath the doors, like, oh my God, like that's really gonna help. And then pot, you know, and then he's smoking it, and but I could never get a hit. I thought it was a rib. I was trying to inhale it, and I couldn't get anything out of this joint. Like everybody else was coughing and everything. I never got one hit. I don't know what the hell was going on. Anyway,
hold on.
I never did get high.
What do you mean you couldn't get anything out of it?
I don't know.
Coughing.
I was stuck on that joint, and I could never get any smoke out of it. And then everybody else was acting like they were, you know, getting good hits, and I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on. This is a big rib or something, because I never could figure out. I never did get high in Japan, but I didn't, you know, I wasn't worried about it. So then that time was the only time I ever seen anybody have marijuana in Japan. Duggan, he would never go without it for, you know, that long, no way. So Kevin Kelly was like in heaven that night. And then Nails, yeah, he was funny as shit, though, trying to ask people for marijuana, like cab drivers, Hard Rock Cafe, the restaurant. I mean, the waitresses, everybody. And everybody just looked like they were scared to death. Like, oh my God, marijuana, drugs. And Nookie, this is one story I always want to tell, because I only heard one person ever say this, and it was Vader on one of his interviews he did, shoot interview. He said that a Nookie sent him women, you know. I don't know if they were hookers or whatever, but women, once he got to be such a big star there, the Nookie sent him women over to his room and everything. And I was like, that's fucking weird, because I never heard of anybody. But the first time I was there, after I told you Nookie was nice to me in Hawaii and all that, talking to me a lot. And I don't know if it was because of Matsuda, the connection with him that I knew and everything good or something. But first time I'm there in Japan, everybody told me before I went there, you never get any women over there, so don't even worry about that. You know, they hate you to be with them. You know, they're women, Japanese. They don't like that, you know, at all. Americans coming over there. And I was like, whatever, I don't care. And then, so this man calls my room at Keo Plaza, you know, first tour there, first week, I think, first night, maybe, I don't remember, it might have been Cork and Hall. But the guy goes, oh, can we come to your room? I have 2 girls. And I was like, what? Yeah, come on up. And they're both, I mean, beautiful. And they go, which one of us do you want? And I was like, what the hell? One of them spoke better English. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I was like, yeah, you, whatever. That was so fucking weird, though. And then they told me later that the Nookie probably set that up, but he don't want nobody to know, Somebody told me that. And then all the guys they'd always come, though, that same girl all the time everywhere, and all the guys would be trying to find women, going crazy, like everybody. Steiner, everybody was going crazy for that 4 or 5 weeks because they couldn't get any girls. And then she'd really kayfabe, too, when she'd do it, this girl. She'd come and sneak in. Nobody was allowed to see her. It was weird as hell. She'd come, like, late when I was in Tokyo or whatever, late at night, and come up to my room, make sure nobody's around, and other wrestlers. So then one night they were all standing outside the doors, though. Sheepherder, Steiner, Dr. Death, everybody, because they're all going crazy and wanting women, Here she comes walking down the hall, my girl. And then she sees my doors open, so she slips in my room real quick, and they're all going crazy. They're so fucking mad at me, like I'm a fence builder. You know what that is, right? It's a name the old timers would call, like you're supposed to share the girls, with each other, but if you don't let the other guys have them, back in the older guys would call you a fence builder. You build a defense around the rat. You romance them and don't give them share with the other guy. So anyway, yeah, that's what they thought I was doing that, like just keeping her for me and not share with nobody else. So they were also fucking mad because I went in the room then, and the next day they were telling everybody on the bus, like, I was like, be quiet, man. They don't like this shit, because there's Japanese guys on the bus too with us, like the referee, what was his name? Peter Taka. The referee, this kind of looks like Toro Tanaka, kind of, the stocky Takahashi, Peter, whatever his name was. He'd be on the bus with us, though, and they're all mad as hell because they think that I got a girl, and I was like, I got all the women I could share with them. I was like, what the hell? So they're telling everybody real loud, yeah, Jerry had that girl. Where'd you get that girl out? I was like, man, quiet. And then everybody's looking, kind of the Japanese guys are looking like, what? Ricky Choshi didn't like that shit at all, I remember. He gave me a dirty look, and then...
He's not even Japanese.
Isn't he? What is he, Korean?
Ricky Choshu's Korean, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, he just didn't like any of us, I don't think, because he never looked happy about anything. But the funniest part was, so then Sheepherder asked me if they can just come in my closet and watch, speak in out of the closet and watch me with her. So I think it was Butch. Yeah, Butch, the other Sheepherder. Not Luke Williams, but Butch Miller. So he goes, mate, can I just come in your closet when next time she's here, and I just want to watch, so I have no women, all this time we're here 5 weeks or whatever. I was like, oh my God, this is weird, man. So he goes, just let me meet her, mate. Let me meet her. Shake her hand. I mean, they were going crazy because no women. And then I let him meet her, and I was trying to hook up the other guy, but she was just like, no, look like your father or something. No, I don't want the other guys. So he was like, come on, mate, let me stay in the closet. I said, nah, man, that's weird. I don't want you watching in the closet. Anyway, so yeah, that's what Vader said, though, on his one of his shoot interviews, that Anuki would send him women and all kinds of stuff. I was like, damn, I never heard any of
Mick Jagger.
I know. Yeah, I know he is. I mean, it was weird just to hear him. I didn't realize how he was, and then the way he talked to me so much in Hawaii, that was weird, because nobody else would even come near him either. I noticed, like, the big names, nobody. Sheik, he just kind of looked from far away, the Sheik, when he walked by us, and I was like, damn, what the hell? Everybody scared to come near Anuki.
You said he spoke really good English. Describe talking to Anuki in English, because I've never heard him speak in English.
I know.
His videos out there.
Yeah. He works like I don't know, to me, he was talking a lot, and he was saying, he watched my match with Muda on the monitor in the dressing room, and then right when I came back to the dressing room, he started telling me, you're getting ready to come to Japan, so, a little bit different style, just stiffer, and, broken kind of, but I mean, a lot better than what I've heard him do on the or somewhere, where was it, WWE? Was he in the Hall of Fame or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a work big time. But no, he said, like, a lot of everything made sense. He talked better than Matsuda even, actually. I don't know if you ever heard Hiro Matsuda talk, but he could talk, definitely, a lot better than what he has on the California Alley. I think he was there too, wasn't he? Anuki. He came out on Entourage and left, right. He didn't even, I heard he didn't even sit down on the tables or nothing. But anyway, yeah, he at the shows, though, he never did that. Like, when I got to Japan, he didn't do stuff like that then. But in the ring, he would say funny stuff, though, to me. I even have a tape with me and Jim Duggan against Anuki, and what's that other guy's name? He used to be Cobra. Him and Anuki against me and Duggan. And the tape, you could see Anuki's laughing when he's saying stuff to me. He's saying, come on, cocksucker, come on, son of a bitch, all kinds of funny stuff. I was laughing too, you could tell on the tape, when they throw those streamers in the ring at you, And then Duggan, they didn't like him too good over there. It was so funny because he'd be the biggest star of all Mid-South and all that. And then they get over there, and it's like, I'm the main event now. And Doug goes like, they tried to push him in the main event, but he's, oh God, if you ever see that match, only like 30 seconds of it's on YouTube. Somebody put it on there. But the parts of the match, he screwed up so bad. I mean, he was talking just like I'm talking to you, that loud, saying like crossbody. And you could see his lips moving, and you could hear it on the TV taping. It was a TV show too, TV taping. You could hear him telling George that spot. He said crossbody, and then he throws him in, and they both do a crossbody. Horrible. I mean, can you imagine Duggan doing a crossbody, first of all? So then he throws him in again. You never do that, especially Japan. The same move again. Throws him in again. Crossbody. Like, don't fuck it up this time. Like he's telling him really loud this time. Same thing again happens. They both do it, this crossbody at the same time again. I mean, I think he did 3 screw up in a row, and then he tagged me in. And I was like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. Yeah, he ended up not being pushed after that. Over there, they were going to have him against Anuki or some big match or something, but then it was like terrible on me. Because that style over there is not really, USA and all that in Japan. Well, I think it was in Hiroshima too, is where the match was, or one of the places, Nagasaki or Hiroshima, one of them, where we were doing the tag. So it was weird though. Some of the guys would be such big names here in America, over there though, they wouldn't get over at all because no technique, and that's what they wanted over there.
How did Kevin Kelly do with that style?
Oh, I like Kevin Kelly, but oh my God, and he's a tough guy too. I think I told that before. Like Fujiwara is a small guy, Fujiwara, and he looked pretty old then too, even. But man, he stretched the hell out. He stretched the hell out of Kevin Kelly, and he was like 180 pounds, maybe. I don't know. He's not big at all. And Kevin Kelly won a lot of tough man contests. He's a badass, and then I don't know what happened, but he kept being real cocky to the guys, and he wasn't a good wrestler. I mean, technique at all or anything. I don't know if you ever seen him. Even when he was nails, he still wasn't. But I mean, the type is not good in the ring, whatever. But he tried to. He was doing that muscle stuff, making his muscles to the audience or whatever, and they hate that over there, especially the wrestlers. They really hate it. So Fujiwara stretches him. I mean, he just laid on the mat for like 5 minutes. He couldn't even move. He just had him laying there. It was the most boring match you ever seen because it was real. He wouldn't let him up. He just laid there. And he finally got over the tag me, and then Fujiwara started working with me then. And then we got back to the dressing room, and Maeda told Kevin Kelly off like hell. He said, he buried him. He goes, you have good coach, pointing to me, You have good coach. He said, you no good. Don't worry about muscle. Don't worry about muscles. Maeda told him off. I mean, he wanted to kill Maeda, but he knew better after seeing Maeda, the big guy, and seeing Fujiwara killed him almost. And then seeing Maeda, he's probably thinking, shit, this guy murdered me. But Maeda just kept putting him down, saying, don't worry about muscles no more. You need learn from him, coach, And he couldn't speak too good English, but it was just funny because he was like saying over and over, no good coach, you have no good coach.
I love Maeda and that group, but especially Maeda's charisma. From the moment he got back after the original UWF break until the second UWF break with the shoot kick to Ricky Choshu's face, he is I mean, everyone on that New Japan roster, the fans react to him in that group. Fujiwara, of course you have Nobuhiko Takada. They react to all of them like they're real, and I totally dig that. Yeah,
they were good too. And for some reason, I don't know if it's because we had some. I wish I had. There's no tape of that though, because it's funny too. Anuki would never put Maeda. I think he was a little bit jealous of him because probably a lot jealous of him because he was over so good. So he would never put him on. We'd have like house shows every night. Me and Maeda be working each other. I don't know if he requested to work with me or what, but it was just like, how in the hell? And everybody else would be looking at the. It'd be up on the paper, like who you're wrestling, and they were all not wanting to wrestle him, Even the tough guys, you could just tell. They'd be like, fuck, hoping their name wasn't next to Maeda or Fujiwara or something like that. And I'd be hoping it was him, because, I liked the stuff he did. And then they'd be like, oh, thank God. And they'd all ribbon me, like, oh, boy. I was like, I don't care. What the hell? Good. And my leg got hurt real bad over there, I told you, in a match for just trying to do a Boston Crab. You know how they do the counter to that? I just twisted it. It wasn't nobody's fault. I think it was with Maeda, too. It was me and Steiner against Maeda and whoever, Takada maybe. And I just went to do the Boston Crab and twist. I had bad knees anyway from amateur wrestling. And then I hurt my knee right then, but I just kept, they like that too. I didn't know, like they really respect that. If you keep working after you're hurt and don't go home, like, and then I just stayed there the rest of the 3 weeks. That's when Chris Benoit, who was a young boy, and he kept bringing me ice all the time and helping me all the time. Him and that other Max Payne, Daryl, I can't remember. Yeah, him.
He
both
was in the
him
dojo
and
with
Chris.
Chris Benoit, yeah.
Yeah, both of them though kept bringing me bags of ice every minute and helping me, and then it was just like and Nookie respected that though, and that's why I told you he gave me the what's that slap called? The slap of whatever Nookie's power.
To
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So
I didn't know what
hold
the hell it was.
Antonio Inoki spoke English to you, gave you women, and also gave you the power.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was. That pissed me off. He knocked that living shit out of me, smacked me in the face, and I couldn't run after because my leg was torn up. And then it was like one of the last days of the tour. It was me and Dr. Death. We always tagged a lot on the house show. Me and Dr. Death against Inoki, main event against Nookie, and who, you know, he always had somebody, Fujinami or somebody as partner. But it was weird. It's like every night I'd either be in a tag with either one. It depends on which time I was there. I was either tagging with Dick Murdoch against Nookie and somebody, or Dr. Death and somebody, or Jim Duggan. Every time it was always in the main event with Nookie. I was like, damn, too bad this ain't happening in America over here. Good shit's happening. But and then Nookie did the smack that after my leg had been hurt the whole tour. Because, I mean, they actually had to tape my leg up like the football players do, you know, because George Wells was a pro football player. I don't know, something like he was. I think, wasn't he? He knew how to do the leg tape thing, though, like when they hurt their knees so much football. So they had to actually tape it like a cast. It was so bad. And then I guess Nookie liked that, because then they'd come over there and tell me, the referees would say, like, Nookie's watching you, and he really likes the way you... I mean, they knew everything I was doing. He'd say, Nookie knows you're going to the gym every day, and I was like, what the hell? Spying on me or what? He knows everything I'm doing. He respects that you're doing this, even with your leg hurt and all that. And then I had to actually... It got so bad, like the second week, and it started healing, though, because they kept bringing me so much ice. And they knew all the, football players. Dr. Death played football, too, and George Wells. They said a good remedy at work. They said just fill the bathtub up hot as you can stay in the water, and then stay in there for 15, 20 minutes, then ice for 15 minutes. And then I did that, like, every night, and then it started healing, actually, even when I'm wrestling every night. So anyway, it started healing, and I started being able to do more matches after that. But at first it was so bad that they put me in 6-man tags, still like main event with Nookie, though. And then the last night, though, he smacked me like that. Nookie did, I guess, just to show me, this is how much I respect you. Wham! I was like, what the hell? Jesus. I've never been hit that hard, even in a real fight.
Still beats drinking your own piss.
For respect, yeah. I did smack Jake, too, though, that night. I forgot about that part. Honky Tonk was just saying that. Yeah, and then smacked him, and then I was, oh, yeah, that's right. I smacked him. Because he tried to smack me, and then I smacked him, and then he kissed me, all kinds of shit. I got a story about Jake. I got a horrible story about Jake, but it's so, I mean, you wouldn't even believe it. It's so, it shows how weird he really, I told Honky Tonk Man this story, and when I had that thing in San Diego last month, and he just was looking at me. He believed it, but he was just like, how sick is this son of a bitch? And then, okay. But I don't think I told this one more about Jake, since he doesn't seem to respond to all the other crap at all, He don't even care. $1, Jake, just $1. Please give me $1. Anyway, he told me one time he was, I don't know if I told you about the time on my couch when he was wanting crack so bad, and I wouldn't take him anymore because he almost got me killed every time I took him down to the hood, They'd all
right, I remember you actually got out of the car with a gun and chased after the guy.
Yeah.
The money
yeah. That's what it ended up being later. Yeah, that's how it ended up being the story. But I don't remember that part. But I did have a gun, but I didn't get out of the car and run after. So anyway, yeah, that was pretty crazy shit happened down there. They stole all of his money, and he was such a big pussy. He said, "No, just leave." All the money I just paid him in like $2,000. I was, are you kidding me? You're gonna let these guys take all that? He said, "I don't care. Just go." I was like, fucking need never going down here again. So anyway, he gets to my house again, and he's like wanting it again, crack. I'm like, oh God. So I actually had some cocaine because I thought some girl liked it, some girl that I had met, she wanted ecstasy. I didn't realize she didn't like every drug. She just wanted ecstasy only. Back in the late 90s, when everybody wanted ecstasy. So I thought she'd like every drug. So I found somebody some cocaine, So she didn't want it. I was just like, fuck, I want to do this shit now. It wasn't very much. So I had it in there, just saving it, for someday some girl might want it. So then he goes, I say, here, I'll just give you the, he goes, oh, you do? And I'm like, yeah, whatever, bullshit, ain't mine. So then, so then he's like,
I knew Jeremy Gray was getting high all these years.
Yeah. So he said, I thought you had. I was like, man, this is not the girl. Yeah, you ain't got to believe it anyway, whatever. So then he cooks it up like a scientist with a spoon and all this shit and makes it and smokes it. And then he starts getting weird then in my house and sitting on the couch. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. So what it was is he called me because Benny Hill, his girlfriend, Benny Hill.
Right.
Whatever fellow. They were in Orlando and she, was telling him all the time, you got to do something with me now and give you all this money all the time. It's time I want something taken care of, So he calls me and said, she's trying to get me again, man. Can I come over to your house? I was like, yeah, whatever, come on. So he gets over there. He's like, yeah, she keeps trying to do this shit. I ain't doing that, man. I'm with her. I was like, yeah, I'm sure. I bet he has. I know he has. And he's like, nah, I ain't doing that. So then anyway, he starts smoking the shit that I gave him or whatever. And he's like, then he starts getting weird. Saying some weird crap. He says, you got any porno movie? I was like, oh, God, this is kind of weird with you. I don't want to watch porno with you. So then we watch it a little bit, and he's like, talking about the guys more than the girls. I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, okay, this is getting weird. Then he goes, that doesn't matter, man. I didn't tell this, did I? I'm gonna fucking tell it.
I don't know where you're going at all.
Okay. I won't do a two X-ray, but this is fucking weird. I just told Honky this. He didn't even never hear this one. So he goes, he's watching this, the porno, and he's like, seconds. It's the same thing, man. Skin. He's really, the crack, whatever it does to him, makes him go crazy and hyper and like energy and everything. All of a sudden, he's like, it's a skin, trying to convince me. It's just skin, same thing, human stuff. Like, oh shit. What the hell's he doing? And he goes, yeah, man. I said, what? He goes, it's the same thing. Humans, men, woman, it doesn't matter. I said, oh, shit. And he goes, because what happened one time, he said, I was with this woman, so I'm doing everything. And all of a sudden her husband comes home and puts a gun to my head and tells me to suck it. And I was like, oh, my God. I said, what'd you do? He goes, I swallowed it down. It wasn't that bad. He said he swallowed it. I said, what the fuck? He goes, and he starts trying to convince me. That's when he realized it's not that bad. It's like, he said, it's the same thing, man. I swallowed it all down. I was like, oh, shit. And I started getting really nervous, and I'm like, this motherfucker is trying to convince me. I can't believe this shit. I never expected, that of him, everything else, but I never suspected that of him, And I was like, maybe that's why he was at Vince's house. All the stories. He was telling me about Vince, all kinds of stories, too. I'm like, okay. What about you, motherfucker? You're the one saying all this weird shit right now. Don't worry about Vince, him and Shawn Michaels and all this shit he was telling me.
What would he tell you about Vince and Shawn Michaels?
Oh, yeah, the story. He said, Jake was actually at his house, on the booking meetings and all that, too, so who knows what he did. But he goes, the bearskin rug and all this crap, Ultimate Warrior. Vince had a picture of him laying on that, naked on that bearskin. You ever heard about that one?
No.
Oh, yeah. Vince has got a bear rug, a real bear skin rug. And then he had pictures of Ultimate Warrior. I've heard that from other people, too, as well. And then Jake told it. Jake don't usually make up stories either because this shit's pretty weird.
Vince McMahon had pictures of. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Warrior.
The Ultimate Warrior nude on his bearskin rug?
I've heard it. I didn't see it myself, but I've heard it from a bunch of different people.
But how would that even get out? If that was true, how would word get out?
That's what I said.
Yeah.
It's from the top guys that would know. Is the reason I don't believe it when it's coming from somebody like fucking Bear Horowitz or somebody. But
when Jake's saying it while he's smoking cocaine, I would certainly believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, not just Jake, though. It wasn't just him, though. It was like, I've heard it from George. Well,
don't
George
say
Steele.
who. You just said one.
Okay, I've heard different. Yeah, I've heard from different people that were in the office and big names. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't like from somebody that's never even worked there. And then he said some stuff about Shawn Michaels. I heard that from a lot of different people. I don't know.
That Vince was having a relationship with Shawn Michaels?
I've heard it from a lot of people. I've never seen it either, but I'm just saying. And then and Ultimate Warrior even said he used to go to, Vince's house and stay with him on the weekends and stuff a lot. And so it's like, I don't know. I don't know if they're just jealous or I've heard so much shit, and some of it's from like independent guys. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to. I ain't gonna listen to this guy. But when it's somebody that was actually at Vince's house, and booking meetings with him and everything else, it's like,
I mean, when Jake Roberts is saying it to you while he's trying to seduce you, obviously,
yeah,
I would believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's trying to convince me. See, even Vince does it. There's nothing wrong with it. Shit, he's a billionaire. No, I don't know, but I'm just telling you. And Vince, he was cool when I first worked there. With whatever year it was, '87. Vince was in the dressing room, and I remember he liked girls at that time because Cherry Martell bent over, to do something when I think she was with Honky then. What was that name she did?
Oh, Peggy
with the wig
Sue.
on. Yeah. Well, anyway, he's in the dressing room just hanging with all of us, Vince was at that time. And he's like, she bent over, because I already got in with him quick, because Jake, he loved Jake for some reason. Vince did. And then Jake was like, at that time still, we had just lived together a couple years before that, big buddies, So Jake's talking to me, and Vince is standing there telling Jake, oh, you're really straight now. I think he just went to his first rehab or something. And Jake's kind of halfway laughing about it. And Vince is almost kind of laughing too. So I was just like, what the hell? Because I know he did all the shit with the guys too, drugs back then. Valentine told me. Anyway, he's telling Jake that. So then he kind of it was just weird. I don't know. I got kind of right in quick, like with the inside stuff, like standing there with Jake talking to Vince and everything. So then Sherry bent over, her boobs were hanging out kind of, and then Vince looked up at me and did his eyebrows like while he's looking at her tits, I was just like, well, okay, I guess he likes women too, whatever. So then, and then anyway, he was cool back then. And then I remember the funniest part was I had brought some guy with me that wasn't a good worker at all. I didn't train him, but he was just like a guy that used to give me rides and stuff like that. He was trying to be a wrestler. So he came with me down there. And then I already told you that's where Humperdinck and Rick Rude see me walk in the building. And I just hurt my leg, like I was telling you from Japan. So I was like, I wasn't wanting to work for a while, I wanted to rest for a while. And they go, I just came there to see Jake, actually. I hadn't seen him a couple of years. And the Rude and Humperdinck said, oh, you working there? Come on. They brought me over to everybody. I was like, oh, fuck. I'm not going to hurt their feelings after they do all this work trying to get me booked. And then I was like, oh, great. So then my legs all hurting when I had to wrestle Macho Man and everybody. And then, the guy that was with me, I told you to give me rides. He was just like he only had like a couple matches maybe. And then Savage thought he was doing, Savage thought he was doing me a favor by this. So McMahon goes, who's this? I'm not going to say his name because he might hear this, but the guy, he goes, McMahon goes, who's this guy, whatever his name? And then Savage goes, is he with you? I said, yeah, I was like, don't fucking plug him though. He goes, he's great. Yeah, this guy's good. He's in with him. Well, Jesus, no. Don't fucking say it with me. So then I'm watching on the monitor, standing behind McMahon. He's watching this guy after he got to go there with Anvil and Bret Hart, the Hart Foundation. This guy did, and they tried. He was big too, kind of like heavy, not good, but just no good, sloppy body. And they tried to pick him up for something. You know how Bret Hart could do anything usually with anybody. He tried. He couldn't even do the one arm backbreaker with him. He was like the guy fell. He was too heavy. He didn't even jump. And then he fucked that up and screwed something else up. And the man goes, where the hell did we get this guy at? Jesus Christ. And then I went and kind of hid somewhere. And Savage is the one that said, not me. So Savage said how good he was just because he was with me. It was funny. So anyway, that was the story. But Jake, yeah, he swallowed down all the stuff he told me, and there was nothing wrong with it. And then he started telling me, I was just like, I'm getting sleepy, aren't you? And he was like, he knew. Fuck, he's got to tell everybody this shit now. He didn't go for it, and now I'm going to get exposed someday. So I was just like, I'm getting sleepy, and he looked at me like, oh, shit. And he thought for sure that I was going to, for some reason, I don't know whatever gave me the idea that I would fall for his weird shit. So then he goes, yeah, I am too. And I was just like, he looked at me in the eyes, like you could tell, like, oh, fuck. So I went in my room. He was going to sleep on the couch, I thought, and he was so embarrassed. I locked my door too because I thought he was going to come in there and try to rape me. Anyway, he was, I'm telling him seriously, he was being so weird. I was like, man, this fucker is weird. And then I heard the door click. He left. He was so embarrassed. I don't think I actually ever seen him again after that. That was the last time he was in my house and tried to come on to me, and then he was so embarrassed from that night, I think.
Well, we go back to the famous story though about the don't drink the piss. Remember, he kissed you that night.
Yeah, that was before he did this crap on the couch. Yeah, that was a couple of years before. This was like the last time I ever seen him, probably 2001. It was right before I was getting ready to have a tour of Saudi Arabia. And then he was screwing it all up, Jake was. That's why I just got sick of all his crap. He got money up front again that time, and then I couldn't find him right when it's ready to happen. He ruined everything. They said, we're not even going to do it if you don't have that's the main one we wanted. And then I couldn't find him. He just disappeared. And then, yeah, he kissed me on the lips like a year or two before this and drank the piss and all that crap. This is like the last time. I probably talked to him on the phone maybe after that, but I never seen him in person after that. That night he did that. So, Jake, send me some money and I'll quit telling all your crappy stuff you did. Anyway.
So for the record, as we wrap things up, we want to plug your GoFundMe, but Jake Roberts still owes you a great deal of money, and he has avoided you every time you've attempted to contact him to get the money that he owes you back, and you actually need it because you're going through so many medical issues, but that's the correct story, right?
Well, the worst thing was I didn't even ask him for money. At first, I just told him that I was sick and everything when it first happened. And then he must have thought, like, oh, fuck, he ain't got nothing for me. I don't know. I want to talk to him. Like if it's not a show or something where you can get deposit again or something, That's the worst thing, man. It's like I didn't even ask for anything. He's fucking just ignoring me. Any other time, like if I call him or wrote him or anything, he thought there's a show coming up because it always was usually for him, for me. And then when it didn't have anything to do with shows, it was like nothing. That's why I finally said, what? By the way, what about the money? I didn't even say nothing about that. Jeez. Yeah, he just ignored it completely, everything.
Once again, we want to tell everyone, tinyurl.com/GoFundGoldenBoy. If you have enjoyed Jerry Gray here on the Super Podcast, telling us these amazing stories, giving so many great laughs to people out there, please consider contributing to tinyurl.com/GoFundGoldenBoy. Every little bit helps. If every listener donated $1, Jerry would have been able to meet his goal multiple times over now. It's bothersome that it hasn't happened that way. But once again, you can make your donations now. Jerry, any last words to the listeners?
No, I just appreciate everything. And I'm glad that everyone enjoys these stories. And they are 100% true. And you can ask some of the other big names a lot of these stories. Honky Tonk Man knows, and a lot of other guys too. So, like I said, I appreciate all the help. And actually, it's not just for medical things. I mean, when you have no money coming in, I'm actually food. I even appreciate a couple of the listeners. They've even sent me groceries a few times and cards for food, Winn-Dixie, stuff like that. So I appreciate everything pretty much. Very much. And like I said, just thank you so much, everyone. And I'll continue to give you these good stories. And I have many, many more. Thank God I do have a good memory.
There he is, the Golden Boy, Jerry Gray. Once again, tinyurl.com/GoFundGoldenBoy. Every dollar helps out Jerry. If you enjoy these segments on the show, consider lending a hand and helping him out right now while he is battling stage 4 cancer.
We love you, Jerry. Keep on fighting. Kick that cancer's ass.
Kurt, it is now time for Book of the Week.
Book of the Week?
Book of the Week. And I am so excited about this week's Book of the Week. And, of course, the next segment you hear will be all about it. It is Death of the Territories, Expansion, Betrayal, and the War That Changed Professional Wrestling Forever by Tim Hornbaker. Have you heard about this book, Kurt?
I have heard about it, and actually, once I finish Rock Rim's book on Northern California, that's the next book wrestling-related book I plan to read.
This book is tremendous. Tim does such an amazing job of researching an era that is pretty hard to come up with information on. Of course, after a while, it's all Vince McMahon, and that's really a closed door. It's very hard to get information out of there, but Tim does a fantastic job. This information I've never seen or known for sure before. I've talked to Jim Cornette about this book, and we just couldn't believe some of the stuff that we read in here. It is fantastic. If you've ever wondered exactly how the cookie crumbled in the 80s, how did all the territories coexist before they couldn't coexist? What exactly happened? How fast did it happen? All of the answers are right here in this book. This book gets the highest possible recommendation from the Super Podcast. I thought this book was tremendous. Death of the Territories, Expansion, Betrayal, and the War That Changed Pro Wrestling Forever by Tim Hornbaker. I suggest everyone get this now. I believe it's available for pre-order, although some people have mentioned that they've already received copies, but you could definitely pre-order it now at Amazon. If you're going to go there, use tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. By using that link, you support this show. You don't pay any more money than you would normally pay with Amazon. You do nothing different than you would normally do, except you input this link, tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon, into the bar instead of Amazon.com. And by doing so, we get a little bit of love and support for every purchase that is made once you add an item to your cart after using that link. It's a great way to support this show. We don't hit you over the top with really stupid fucking ads. We don't insult you. We give you the best quality wrestling content that anyone produces to this day. If you appreciate that or you enjoy that and you don't want to do anything different, you don't want to spend money, you don't want to buy a t-shirt, use tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon, to support this show. And of course, don't forget to give that link to your girlfriend, your mistress, your wife, your boyfriend, your husband, whatever it may be. I don't give a fuck. Give them the link, tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. Lots of other shows have links. Lots of other shows are so desperate for your support. They are whores. We're not whores. We've got integrity over here. So when it comes down to it, you have to decide, which show should I support? Should it be the little motherfuckers that suck? Should it be the big motherfuckers that suck? Or should it be the Mothership, the best wrestling podcast on the planet? I think the answer will be quite obvious when it comes down to it. When it comes down to them or us, fuck those guys.
Fuck them, because I'll sick my mother's posse on them.
Support the Super Podcast. Support your Super Podcast. And with that, Kurt, let's go to this conversation I had.
Brian?
Yeah.
Brian, I know you only do one book review each time, but I just came across a book review it's over 10 years old, but it's still quite tropical. Do you ever read a book called Good Morning, Holy Spirit by Benny Hinn? You know, the Benny Hinn or Benny Hinn, the guy who goes around smacking people on the head?
I know who he is. I have not read any of his works. I must.
Oh, well, the ghost of Dr. Jerry Graham read one of his works many years ago. And through the great science of channeling, he talked about the wonderful person, Tom Hankins, who he knows as his son Charlie, or Steele, got him the book Good Morning, Holy Spirit in 1984, that Christmas, when we all joined him for some Canadian club and lots of sativa and cigars. Well, he read the book, and this was his take on it. So my son Steele and his wife Sue, with the best of intentions, bring this book to me one Christmas, after they endured a long journey and a night filled with holiday sativa and orange sunshine tea. I'm telling you. Filled with the Holy Spirit, they caroused the streets of Northridge and Reseda, allowing their sixth senses to guide them into Hollywood to find this gift into an unusual bookstore. It's called Good Morning, Holy Spirit by the evangelist Benny Hinn or whatever you want to call that cocksucker. So it winds up Steele and his wife Sue were so one-dimensionally enamored in their religious experience that when they found this book in Hollywood at 1 a.m. in the morning, they thought it said Good Morning Starshine by Benny Hill in the cast of Hair. They envisioned a paradise in which the spirit of Britain's late comic genius chased cute go-go girls through meadows and grassy knolls to the tune of yakety sax. Yakety sax, I'm telling you. Now, beautiful as that vision is, and I believe that with hard work we can attain it, it was not covered in these pages, no. Steele and Sue, along with my Wolfpack Physico-Nuclear, Herr Mr. Barrington, Reverend Anton T. Ripper, and Vandal Drummond, they spilled through my hotel room and fell into my cell, all upon a Christmas Eve. We ate and drank ourselves merry, and we entertained ourselves with a box that once contained a He-Man and the Masters Universe toy castle. It was beautiful. We were drinking, we were smoking, Okay, Chapter 1, Can I Really Know You? Now, this displays the lunatic prophecies this preacher possesses. He speaks of the day the Holy Spirit entered his room and that he was as real as the book you are holding in your hand is to you. And, kid, where do you get these lines? I'm telling you, His awakening is misguided, as proven 2 paragraphs later. It seemed that my room had been lifted into the hemisphere of heaven. In other words, he loses his mind by the mistaken translation of his experience. It did not seem that his room had lifted. His room did levitate through the guidance of Lord Krishna and Principe Elefante. He astral projected through time, twilight, sobbed upon the tree of woe, and even entered the poppy held by Prince Gautama Buddha. Benny Hinn almost achieved enlightenment, ready to hypnotize and pacify entire troops of ill-willed Cthulian bastards whose anger spilled over when the rainbow was not enough. But Hinn played the fool, and he did not recognize the real spirit before him, the spirit that graced great Gama with wrestling brilliance and Hindu squats, that spirit that threw fresh frog fruit amid the arid regions of the Allen Hotel. No. Hinn misinterpreted the Hindu bliss before him, and instead he was plastered with visions of Saloni's crazy uncle running nude down the streets of San Fernando, surrounded by blaring sirens of police and firemen that chased him down. The horror. The horror. But fortunately, this book turned into a winged creature and flew out my hotel room window with the help of my hand and still lit up a comforting, wonderful Christmas tree. Then did the right hemisphere of the brain short-circuit the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere short-circuited the right hemisphere, and bing! We were there. Enlightenment achieved. I'm telling you the truth.
Let's now go to this conversation with the author of Death of the Territories, wrestling historian Tim Hornbaker.
He's beautiful.
We are back on the Superpodcast with the man who just wrote the new book, Death of the Territories, Expansion, Betrayal, and the War That Changed Professional Wrestling Forever. And that is Tim Hornbaker. He has written several books about wrestling, but this one has really caught my eye, and I fell in love with it. I think it's great. Tim, thank you for being here today.
Brian, thank you for having me. It's a true honor. I really appreciate it.
Well, before we talk about this book and this period of time in general, which, you call it the Death of the Territories, it's really the 80s. It's really just the entire decade of the 80s as everything dissolves and changes and evolves and whatever you want to call it. But you've done some other wrestling books in the past. Most of them have been historical. Most of them have been really heavy on research and have uncovered a lot of facts that a lot of historians and a lot of other fans didn't know before. What is your background? What is your background with wrestling, and what is your background with actually doing research?
I started as a fan of professional wrestling. I mean, that's pretty much the genesis of everything. I really fell in love with wrestling and wanted to learn more about its background, its heritage, the legacy of wrestling. And a little bit at a time, I started acquiring information here and there, and I started, looking at old newspapers and magazines, and that became more of a drive. I wanted to share with other people the information that I was finding, and that all culminated into my 2007 book, National Wrestling Alliance, The Untold Story of the Monopoly That Strangled Pro Wrestling. And in that book, I was kind of able to give readers a wide perspective of the birth of the NWA, the major players, and the background of that organization. And also one of the highlights of that book was talking about the Department of Justice investigation into the NWA. So that was a book that I was really proud of, and wanted to put it out there and share with people this amazing history of wrestling. I've written several other books. I can go into those too if you would like.
Well, the interesting thing I want to bring up is you bring up your first book, which was all about the NWA. Of course, your second book was about the rise of Capital Wrestling. Of course, the McMahons, the WWF, the WWF. This book is about the death of the territories. In many ways, the death of the NWA. Do you see this in any way as like a trilogy? How do you see this 3-volume set?
I kind of do, yeah. I feel like one book leads to the next and then ultimately leads into this book. You're absolutely right. My NWA book kind of laid out the territories and the major players, and what their backgrounds were and what kind of success they were having. Capital Revolution was kind of right in the middle and talked about the rise of Vince McMahon Sr. in the Northeastern Territory and how that was shaping the business with the original WWF. And this book looks at the evolution of wrestling in the 70s and 80s up until it became a two-horse race between McMahon Jr.'s WWF and Jim Crockett and then WCW. So, yeah, I do kind of see it as a trilogy, and that's a great explanation for these books.
You do get to trace the history of the NWA from the very beginning till the end. I mean, of course, it still exists in a form today, and it has for many, many years now. But for all purposes that we would really look at, it died really at the end of the 80s. I mean, by that point, it was never going to be what it was ever again. A collection of promoters collectively booking a champion, voting on a champion, booking him out. I mean, it was never going to be that ever again. And in many ways, it's depressing, but in other ways, you see the rise of the McMahon family. I mean, that's the other thing. It's kind of, while you're tracing the history of the NWA and the trajectory of it, you're also doing the same thing with the McMahons as a separate entity.
Yeah, absolutely. And the McMahons' progress from the Northeast, actually, you can even go before that when Vince McMahon Sr. was in Washington, D.C., and how he initially took on television in the 1950s and how that kind of helped his promotion. And then he got himself into New York and Madison Square Garden, and then the formation of the WWF. And then if you trace it through what happened in the 1980s and then even continue to this day where, you know, McMahon and the WWE Network, I mean, there's really is a massive progression of the success that the McMahon family has had, and nobody in professional wrestling history could even compare.
Well, before we get going too far into wrestling, I do want you to talk a little bit about some of your other books, real quick, because we have talked about baseball here on this show. We are baseball fans. What are some of the baseball books you've done? Because these are other books I'm interested in.
Yes, absolutely. I've done 3 books on baseball history, the dead ball era. The first one was Turning the Black Sox White, The Misunderstood Legacy of Charles A. Comiskey. It's essentially a biography of Charles Comiskey, who was the owner of the White Sox and always got a bad rap for underpaying his players during the Black Sox scandal. My second book was War on the Base Paths, a definitive biography of Ty Cobb. Again, Ty Cobb was a player who is often criticized, but at the same time called one of the greatest players to ever live. So that was a challenging book to kind of sort out the truth from fiction. And my last baseball book was Fall from Grace, The Truth and Tragedy of Shoeless Joe Jackson. Joe Jackson was caught up in the Black Sox scandal. He was a guaranteed Hall of Famer. Had he not got caught up in the Black Sox scandal, he would be a legend today. But that book kind of examines where he went wrong and how ultimately his life ended kind of in sadness and tragedy.
There had been a push, at least a few years ago, I don't know if it's still going on, to get Shoeless Joe into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even to this day, there are supporters that think that, he was completely faultless. They claim that his batting average during the 1919 World Series proved that he wasn't involved. He hit the series' only home run. He did play well, but that didn't discount the fact that he still took $5,000 of gambling money, and he did know about it. And the book tells, and I'll explain to you now, that he could have at any point told somebody about what was happening. He could have done any number of things, but he took the money. He didn't tell anybody about it, and he has paid the price in history.
What's easier for you, or what's harder for you, I should phrase it as, doing a biography of an individual or doing an overall history of a time or a place or a company?
That is a great question, and I actually have thought about that recently. I probably doing a more complex history of multiple things at one time would be harder than a biography. I think biographies are probably more fun for me because you really get into the life of a person. You know about pretty much anything you could find about that particular individual comes into the play when you're researching a biography. But a book like Death of the Territories, I mean, it was a very complex history with so many different moving parts. Making sure that you keep it organized and keep the facts straight becomes a challenge. And I love history. I love researching. I love, taking on these big projects. And I look forward to doing more in the future.
That's really what it is, the complexity, all the moving parts. It's hard to really encapsulate that and put it into focus. What era did you find harder to do research for? The early era of the NWA, the 40s and the 50s, or the 70s and 80s?
You'd be surprised. It's definitely the 70s and 80s. I mean, I think, just the fact, and I grew up watching wrestling in the 80s, and I absorbed all the information I could growing up, but just to tell you, I found more primary source documentation for older stuff than I do for newer stuff. And I don't know if it's the people that were involved or just they threw it away or there's just not documentation. I think also the fact that the U.S. government filed suit against the NWA and confiscated documents, and those documents are in the National Archive. Me obtaining that information allowed me to get a better sense of what was happening with the NWA at that particular time, wherein now there's really not that kind of archive of information that's out there. So with this book, it was definitely a challenge. And again, with all the moving parts, to keep it all, organized and to tell a true and honest story in a clear and concise manner was definitely just an overall challenge for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by some of the detail you had that I had not seen in previous work that had been done on the era. Some of the facts clearly, would come from an NWA meeting. And I guess that's kind of why some of the information dries up after a certain point, because at a certain point, the minutes of the NWA meeting don't matter anymore. It's just a formality. Absolutely. And you put together a lot of things. The one thing I've talked about, I think I did it on Jim Cornette's show, I may have done it here on 605, is the detail in exactly how the Sheik left the NWA. I had never knew the whole story before, but you actually had the information. You knew exactly what happened. Yeah, I mean, the Sheik, I think he was running on empty, and I think fans in the Detroit territory were not buying what he was selling. But on top of that, you had different issues as far as Detroit itself was per se. There was a lot of issues socially and economically. Yeah, he eventually lost his TV. He got in trouble with the NWA. I mean, there was a lot of different factors that the Sheik ran into at the end of there, and essentially, rang the bell for Detroit. And a lot of Detroit fans, who loved the old wrestling at Cobo Hall and whatnot, I mean, they were definitely disappointed by that. Talking about this book, talking about Death of the Territories, one of the interesting things, and I think this is an overall arching story that we could talk about here, but one of the interesting things is the idea, and it's not even an idea, I think it's a fact that you very neatly point out. I mean, that's one of the things your book does, is it balances the actual detail and the research with moving the story along and explaining everything that's happening, is that the idea that Vince McMahon killed wrestling and killed the territories really is not strong as an argument if you look at the facts, because while you may not like the direction he took it, someone was going national, and many people were already making the play to go national before Vince made his big move, correct? Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely 100% true. Vince McMahon had the firepower first, I would say, to go national and to be successful than his competitors at that point. And you make a great point that people wanted to blame McMahon for killing the territories. I think he's always had a bad rap, got a bad rap for that. The territories were headed for the end of the road as it was. The territories, the promoters that ran the individual territories, they weren't young men. Let me just put it that way. These promoters were in their 50s, 60s, 70s years old. They were very ingrained in their mindset and in their regions, and didn't have a kind of a wider perspective to change with the times. And here you had a young, enterprising man like Vince McMahon Jr., who stepped into the fold here and kind of just did what he wanted to do. He wasn't held down by the old constraints or the old handshake agreements, and the territories didn't have a chance. And like you said, if he hadn't done it, somebody else would. Would they have been successful? I don't know. No, it's hard to say. It certainly would be a different direction for wrestling. But one of the things your book really points out well is the swiftness of it. It was quick. Vince, from the moment he takes over the company in the summer of '82, he is moving quick. He right away swallows up LaBelle. And I couldn't believe some of the information you had from the LaBelle lawsuit. That was fascinating stuff. Did he really pay LaBelle, or at least promise to pay LaBelle, more money than he was going to pay the partners in Capital Wrestling? I love that. Finding that court case, and even there wasn't a full deposition within the court case files, but what was there was utterly fascinating. And that was one of the big finds that I had for this book, was the court documents for the LaBelle McMahon case.
And yes, it appeared that he was going to pay more for the Southern California territory than he did his father and the shareholders of Capital Wrestling. I don't know how much he paid. That is not clear from the documentation. But what is clear was the claim from LaBelle that all of the payments weren't made. At some point, it stopped. And it was also revealed that McMahon and LaBelle only had a handshake agreement, which, of course, didn't hold up in court.
It didn't, and LaBelle, that was it. That was the end of Michael Bell with professional wrestling. He moved on, and Vince didn't look back, but there's a lot of stories similar to that. You know, when Vince starts making his moves, he either tries to buy you, or he'll just find a way to gut you and take everything.
No, that's absolutely true. Yes, definitely.
And all these partnerships, you know, even Larry Matisic. Larry Matisic was going to be, until he doesn't need you, you know, then he pushes you aside as soon as he doesn't need you.
I think, yeah. He realizes that, you know, he can go, you know, achieve the same success without you, and then he makes his move.
I bring up Larry Matisic. What do you think of St. Louis as kind of a perfect encapsulation of everything happening in 82 and 83? The changes that are happening in terms of the NWA being this organization with mostly older promoters. You know, there are a few younger guys, Ron Fuller, Jim Crockett Jr. wasn't relatively old, but it was Bob Geigel. You know, you still had that element in there. But when you look at St. Louis from after Sam Mushnick's retirement, it's almost like that really shows you what's going to happen to the NWA, just that one town.
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation for it. I mean, you really look at that and see how it went from being the shining star of the NWA to, you know, essentially just a WWF town that, you know, McMahon controls. That process was unbelievable. And I'm sure a lot of people that lived in St. Louis went through they probably had a lot of nightmares in that period where, you know, you're hanging on with Bob Geigel and you're trying to keep the NWA name alive. And essentially Geigel lost St. Louis and he'd eventually lose Kansas City. So, you know, you have that transition period where it goes from, you know, the heart of the NWA, this certain style of wrestling, this certain promotion that has integrity and these wrestlers who could really wrestle, and then and not to put down the WWF, but what people perceived of McMahon's wrestling at the time in comparison to the WWF or to the NWA. You had, you know, colorful characters. You had, you know, these circus performers, as people would claim, you know, like, you know, these gimmicks, you know, and nobody wanted to really, they didn't want to embrace that, I can just say. And, you know, and St. Louis really was hit hard. And I'm sure for those old time fans, it was a rude awakening.
And there was no strong leader. And I don't mean that to insult anyone like Bill Watts or Jerry Jarrett, who were very successful. And, you know, certainly Bill Watts was a strong leader from Mid-South. But in terms of getting everyone together, Pro Wrestling USA failed pretty quickly and, you know, had no chance of succeeding. None of these guys could get along. And eventually, it wasn't even just the WWF. You look at a town like Memphis. Jim Crockett goes in there. The UWF goes in there. Vince McMahon goes in there. They all start competing for the same towns. Look at Alabama. Everyone's going into there. Now you have three companies and a homegrown territory all going into one town. It was a funnel of death, you know, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And how does a territory survive at that point? I mean, you have so much going on. Where do the fans' loyalty go? I mean, you have this influx of new fans that are embracing the WWF and its style, these families that are appreciating the WWF. And then you have the old school fans that are looking at this and just boggled, you know, just completely out of their minds that wrestling is being changed before their eyes and they could do nothing about it. So, I mean, wrestling really was going through an amazing transformation at the time.
The image on the cover of your book is Vince McMahon, that famous moment where he walked onto the set on World Championship Wrestling and welcomed everyone to the World Wrestling Federation.
Definitely.
One of the most famous moments in wrestling history. That is the summer of 84. If you look at from the summer of 82 until the summer of 1984, did anyone play his hand worse than Ole Anderson?
It would be hard to say. Yeah, Ole Anderson, I mean, he made a lot of big mistakes. I mean, if you look at the fact that he himself was trying to go national and was making moves out west and overextending his promotion, I mean, here you had someone who had WTBS and you had so many good things, had these star wrestlers working for him, had a lot of really positive momentum. And, you know, like you said, his ongoing fight with Jim Barnett and just all of the underpinning of dissension in the organization. So, yeah, by 1984, just to see the company ripped out from underneath them was stunning, but yet not surprising when you look back and see all the turmoil that was going on.
For this period of time, like we said earlier, it's a little tougher to come up with information. What did you use? What were your sources, or not sources, but what were your methods of finding information for this period of time?
That's a great question. I relied on many different sources, from old interviews, magazines, newsletters, old newspaper articles, court cases like we mentioned. I kind of just pulled in every piece of information that I could. And of course, I acquired an amazing amount of information. And I think one of my challenges at that point was keeping it organized, trying to find, fact from fiction, and then kind of putting it into a comfortable narrative where I think, readers would appreciate the text. I didn't want to overload readers with too much, but I wanted to give, I wanted to provide a heavier text for people to appreciate what really was happening at the time. So it was a burden on me to really keep it clear, keep it, first of all, organize all this information and then put it onto paper and then allow readers to really appreciate the immense, the magnitude of what was happening in wrestling in the 1980s.
It's amazing that the book starts with so many different characters, so many different places, and everything's just swallowed up by the end.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
Everything is gone by the end. I mentioned the swiftness of Vince McMahon in all the moves he made from the moment he took over, and especially once things were officially declared, he just went full blown. I don't have money. I don't care. I'm going to bet on everything. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought from reading your book that the war was over before I realized it. When I look back sometimes, I think WrestleMania, the war was over. The war was over before WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you really look at it and see how far McMahon was in front of everybody, and one of the things that really astonished me in doing research for this book was how many different revenue streams McMahon had in comparison to his opposition. And that really gave him the padding to take more chances and to do different things and to even buy out his competition in certain situations where, you had Verne Gagne, who, he started some merchandising with Remco, and you had other promoters that were trying to add these revenue streams. McMahon was light years ahead of them, and he had the money, he had the resources, and he also had the corporate entity really behind him.
Yeah.
Titan Sports was really an organized business at that stage of the game. Nobody could compare, and it really just goes to show you that he was much more prepared to take his business national in comparison to, Gagne and the rest.
And Jim Crockett Jr., when he was the last man standing, was really overwhelmed. I mean, it was over like that. You snap your fingers and he turned around and it's like, what happened?
Yeah, no, he, and again, he kept, with what he had, he had great talent. He had, a great booking system, and he expanded. He had the syndication network. Crockett did many things right, but even so, McMahon was just so far in front that even though it was a two-horse race by the end, still it's hard to say that McMahon was in any jeopardy other than, when he had all his eggs in one basket in the first WrestleMania. That kind of, I believe that was kind of a scarier time for him as far as money went. But once he slipped past WrestleMania and that was a success, I think the ball was rolling enough to where, he had the money and he had, the wrestlers in the proper position, and he was just, there was no stopping him.
No, and it was just a perfect storm also of timing, because Dr. D slapped John Stossel, I want to say in December, but it didn't air until I think February. So
yeah,
once that airs, even though it's negative, in almost every way, they talk about wrestling being fake, a guy blades, and then the reporter gets beat up by the wrestler. Even though it's really negative, it gets wrestling more out there. Cyndi Lauper's involved. It's more out there. Hulk Hogan chokes out Richard Belzer right before WrestleMania. Again, somehow that ended up helping. Any publicity is good publicity really worked at that time. And then Saturday Night Live the day before WrestleMania.
Yeah, it's hard to say, you had so many things happen. The WWF was constantly in the news. So I think for, getting getting his brand out there, good or bad, people were realizing, the WWF was something to kind of keep an eye on. And for wrestling fans, and I think that were willing to take a chance on it. I think, hearing all that and hearing the amazing hype headed toward WrestleMania, it was hard to not kind of take an interest and see, hey, what is this all about? And let's, let me take a chance. And like I said, it's hard to say that McMahon was going to fail at that point. I mean, the ball was rolling for him and he was doing really well in spite of all of this negativity.
And he was in Connecticut. He was just right there across from New York City. And he was also able to form relationships. And one of the most important ones was with Dick Ebersol, who may be one of the most unheralded people in terms of the success of the World Wrestling Federation, because he put Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on Saturday Night Live. He put Saturday Night's Main Event on the air. And then he also really taught them how to turn their production into a top-notch production. And he's the one who led everything that turned the look of the programming around.
And that also, the look of the programming in comparison to the territories in those days, I mean, it was night and day. So, yeah, I mean, getting the opportunity to be on NBC and Saturday Night Live and exposing, these bigger-than-life characters and Hulk Hogan to the world and with Saturday Night's Main Event, I mean, it was just, so many things were going right for McMahon. But at the same time, he was willing to make the moves necessary to increase and improve his own business. And like you said, the production values, he was always working on them. And when you watch wrestling on NBC or even Saturday or one of the weekend shows, you really got a sense that this was a first-class kind of production versus the grainier territorial shows. And even the AWA, I mean, all of these promotions kind of struggled with their presentation. McMahon knew what he was doing, and it was almost a work of art with what he had.
We talked about how what happened was really inevitable in a lot of ways in terms of someone going national. It ended up being Vince, and really when you look at it, Vince had the best organization, the best staffing, and the best idea of how to really make something a national league where people would look at it and accept it as the only thing that matters, and that was the World Wrestling Federation. But would anyone have been able to do anything to change things, to really change the trajectory, at least on the national stage? And specifically the one everyone always talks about is Bill Watts, where for a relatively brief period of time, Mid-South Wrestling airs on TBS because Ted Turner is fed up with Vince McMahon, and he gives his old friend Bill Watts, who he knows from when he booked Georgia Championship Wrestling, a TV show on TBS, which quickly becomes the highest-rated show on cable television. They allegedly have a deal. I say allegedly just because we don't know, but Bill Watts has always said, and I haven't heard anyone doubt him, that they had a deal in place where him and Ted would be partners. You know the rest. All the details are in your book. Do you think that would have changed things? How do you think a Bill Watts-Ted Turner relationship at that point in time, in the spring of 1985, with not just wrestling changing, but cable television changing, how do you think that relationship would have worked, and would they have been successful going up against Vince McMahon?
That is a great question, and I believe that if the cards fell perfectly, I feel that if they had the money behind them, I think money was a major downfall for Watts. He had this massive syndication network, and he didn't really have the talent, the wrestlers, the amount of wrestlers to be able to fulfill all of the dates and cities that he had TV in. So he needed to have more wrestlers. I think if Ted Turner is more or less a money man behind Bill Watts and the UWF, I feel like they do have an opportunity to do some things. But again, they're still so far behind what McMahon was already doing at the time. To make it really competitive, a lot of things had to really fall into place. But I wouldn't put it past it if certain things happened, if Watts began to pull talent back in from other areas, if he even got support from other promoters that were excited that he had a national outfit. And I think that was one of the downfalls for the NWA was, once they lost WTBS, they no longer had a massive national network for NWA performers. So if you had Watts with that outlet and you had some money behind them, and Watts' great system of booking and he had a lot of positive things going for him, I think definitely that some moves, they would have had some success. But in terms of being a major direct competitor to McMahon, it's hard to say.
And the interesting thing is, obviously, if Ted Turner's your partner, Vince McMahon's not going to be able to play games with you on pay-per-view like he did in the early days of Jim Crockett on pay-per-view.
Yeah, definitely. And, and that changes the ball game. I think a lot of the muscle that McMahon had and he wielded was relentless against his competition, specifically Crockett. He kind of, he wielded so much power in the pay-per-view world with, the success of his shows and just making the deals that he made. If you flip a coin and you do have Watts and Turner and this big muscle, this entertainment conglomerate behind you, I think a lot of things change.
When you look at the downfall of a UWF or a Jim Crockett Promotions, how much of it do you put on going too far with your syndication package?
I think it's everything. I think at that point, I mean, if you look at what Verne Gagne did with his TV, he essentially did nothing in comparison to, he wasn't out there fighting for TV stations. I mean, he had his circuit and his network, but you look at what Watts and what Crockett were doing, they were following the WWF and McMahon's playbook. And in a way, it wasn't a bad thing that they were doing. They were looking to expand nationally. They were looking to take on new opportunities. But at that same time, if you're going national and you have all these new stations across the country, Albuquerque, Denver, Northern California, you really need to have a plan to go there. And that means you need to have the talent to work in those regions. And then at the same time, you need to make sure that your home regions are being, maintained as well. You have wrestlers for TV. So with that, you have, traveling expenses, you have, these great, huge expenditures. And if you have a 200 plus station in your network, you need to make sure that you're making money from advertising, from live shows. And I think, Watts or Crockett, they were all kind of in the same boat with this, where they had, too much going for them, but not enough coming back. And I think that hurt both of them. It obviously hurt Watts hardest first, but Crockett was going down that same road. Nobody can duplicate what McMahon was doing, and he was headed for disaster.
Vince had WOR already, which was a superstation. He gets TBS, which is another superstation, and then he gets on USA, buying out whatever debt Joe Blanchard has, and all of a sudden Vince McMahon is the only wrestling on cable television. And it's during this time that ESPN starts looking at wrestling, and they make the deal with Verne Gagne. And your book points out, I found this so funny, I never just saw it laid out just so neatly like this, is that as soon as he went on ESPN, nothing ever went up ever again. He got the national television spot, and then everything just continued to slide down. There were never any improvements due to having that national spot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's just utterly amazing that it bumped his promotion. Not at all. There was no bump. There was no growth. There was no plan to use that cable TV outlet to better his organization. And that just goes to kind of show you how deeply McMahon and the wrestling war was hurting his organization. I will give Gagne a lot of credit. I mean, throughout his career, even going back to his days as a wrestler, he was, very successful. He had a good head on his shoulders. He was a smart man. He made a lot of money in the wrestling business. And I think facing the challenges of, the WWF and the losses that he had sustained, Hulk Hogan, and just up and down the line, his roster was just beaten relentlessly by, raids from the WWF. By the time he had gotten ESPN, I feel like, with this great opportunity, there was just nowhere to go with it. He didn't have any new angles. He didn't have any new superstars. There was no meat on the bone. And unfortunately for fans of the AWA, I mean, it was just, it was just a crash course. And, again, it was just a downward slide for him.
If you look at 83, there are so many different promotions on fire. Memphis is on fire. World Class obviously just blows up to the point where Dallas wrestling had never been before. And they're in the best position, by the way, in terms of scale. Like, they have 8 wrestlers on the roster, and all of a sudden it takes off and explodes.
Yeah.
The AWA has their best year in terms of business. Bill Watts has a down year, but 84 ends up being his best year in the history of the business. But when you look at Fritz and you look at Verne, those are two of the real interesting characters at that point in 83. Vince tries to make a deal with both of them. Vince wants to buy both of them. He buys neither of them. And World Class obviously implodes within when the Von Erichs start having their issues. And the AWA is just such an interesting figure. A lot of promotions your book shows went down faster than I thought looking back and just trying to remember. They went down pretty fast. Verne actually held up a little bit longer than most, into early 86. And then it just nosedived.
Yeah, and I give that to Verne just being a steadfast kind of a man who wasn't willing to give in or to throw in the towel. I mean, he was gonna do, he was gonna hang there regardless of what McMahon or the WWF was doing. And in articles and in interviews, he kept saying how, McMahon was never going to put him out of business and how, the AWA was going to continue its success. I mean, he literally believed that the AWA was going to outlive the WWF. And the downward slide for the AWA, just the loss of territory, the cities on his circuit, the one city after the next. I mean, he lost Denver, Chicago, San Francisco. I mean, the list goes on. And, losing those cities really hurt, obviously, Gagne's bottom line. He didn't have the money coming in, and, losing talent and losing the cities, by the end, we're talking, 87, he didn't have much of a territory left.
Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon defenders have always claimed that Vince didn't intentionally do anything to hurt any of the other territories. He just wanted to compete one-on-one in their town, fair and square. When you do research on this, when you see the AWA, and it wasn't just city after city, it was talent after talent, and not just wrestlers. I'm talking backstage talent. It was everyone. When you see that, when you see other things, what do you think? Do you think Vince McMahon was just looking for a fair fight, or did Vince McMahon really try to squeeze these guys?
I think he definitely tried to squeeze them. I think that he knew exactly what he was doing. And I think he looked at who were the major players in front of the camera and behind the camera, and made these big money offerings and lured these big name guys in the knowledge that he knew that pulling one of the backstage guys or, an agent or somebody, or even a big name wrestler, how it was going to hurt his competitors. And and it wasn't, looking at McMahon, he's an interesting person in history. Again, people that dislike him wanted to say he was just this horrendously bad guy and he killed the business and he did all these destructive things. But at the same time, the man was brilliant in what he was doing. And, not everything, again, it just depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you want to look back and say, that was horrible what he was doing. But at the same time, he was a businessman. He was looking at, how to improve his organization, was looking at how to get into the Twin Cities and to, take over the major venues, from Gagne and do these different things. So he was looking at, how to fight this fight against, these old promoters too, I mentioned in the book, they weren't just, nice, innocent people. They had fought the fights of professional wrestling for decades. Gagne had been in multiple wrestling wars where he was the big shot up
That's
against
right.
an independent operator.
Yeah.
So, this was kind of like the roles were reversed now, and you had McMahon as outsider, this young guy, the spirited young guy who, was now taking the fight to Gagne. And I think in a lot of ways, Gagne just didn't know how to handle it. And he did the best he could, and he kept the AWA going as long as he could. And eventually, there was just no more, road to run.
And also look at Verne. I mean, Verne, he owned the AWA. He owned a piece of St. Louis. He owned a piece of Chicago. He was really all over the place. He was going after the West Coast. And he had that history too. I mean, Verne tried to invade Los Angeles when that was an active promotion.
Absolutely.
He tried to take that over. That's the thing. I certainly feel bad for the way Vince ganged up on the AWA and really just, it seemed to be an attempt to humiliate the Gagne family over and over and over again. There's no other way. It does seem that way. Yeah. To me, there's no other way you could see it. But you have to admit, Verne tried to do very similar things. And quite frankly, I think of all the other candidates, even with Ole doing crazy things with Georgia Championship Wrestling, attempting to expand, but not really doing the right things, I think Verne was probably, next to Vince McMahon, the one with the best shot of doing it because he was always trying to do it.
That makes sense. And I agree with you. I think Verne was in a very unique position with the experience that he had. He was college educated. He had served in the Marines during World War II. He was a hard-nosed guy. I mean, he wasn't somebody that could just be pushed around. So when he took over the Minneapolis promotion in the late 50s, I mean, he had seen wrestling wars. He had been in political situations within wrestling, his whole life, essentially. And he was no pushover. He knew what needed to be done in a lot of ways. But I think when you had someone like Vince McMahon who had the money, who had this insatiable drive to to conquer and conquer wherever he could conquer and take over parts of the wrestling landscape. Verne Gagne was just outgunned. He was outmanned, and the loss of his wrestlers. And if you think about all the wrestlers that Verne Gagne trained over the years that eventually went to work for his competition, I mean, it's just unreal. Ric Flair being one of them, Iron Sheik. I mean, there's just a long list of wrestlers who Gagne himself personally trained or had a hand in help training. And these wrestlers didn't, stay within the AWA fold. They actually went to work for opposing organizations. I think, in terms of morale, if I was Verne Gagne, I would be completely despondent at just, the loss of talent, the loss of loyalty, and just seeing, my organization crumble the way it did. And, and Gagne was a tough guy. He fought it as long as he could, but eventually, the WWF won over and put him out of business.
We mentioned earlier that one of your other books is Capital Revolution, which is the history of the McMahon family in wrestling, the history of Capital Wrestling, the parent organization of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. You did that book and you've done this book. What do you see as the similarities and differences between Vince McMahon Sr. and Jr.?
Wow, that's a great question. I think they both had an innate drive to be successful. I mean, they both, and I think a lot of these qualities, I think Vince McMahon Jr. learned from his father. I feel like I think he had a tremendous vision, but at the same time, I think Vince McMahon Sr. also, he had this drive, but he played within the rules of professional wrestling. He adhered to the gentleman's agreements. He didn't step outside of the bounds of, the NWA or, the different promotions. So when he hit his peak and got Madison Square Garden and kind of pulled this, I think it was a 13-state territory into, under his umbrella, there really wasn't a motivation to expand beyond that, even though he could have taken the war to his neighbors or done different things, or he could have tried to be, more successful promoter. I think he appreciated what he had, and I feel like, he respected professional wrestling within those limits. Vince McMahon Jr., on the other hand, he didn't see any limits. He didn't see he didn't, respect the handshake agreements of the old promoters. And not to say that he had a personal vendetta against them, although it might have looked like that. He just was a businessman who was in the sport of, in the field of sports entertainment, and was going to branch out regardless of who liked it. So there was a lot of qualities that were similar between father and son, but you have to just step back and just be amazed at the tremendous vision of Vince McMahon Jr. and even to what he's accomplished to this day. It's just astonishing.
1982 is a long time ago, so it's easy to forget. We look back now and we know Vince McMahon is what he is, this ultra-successful P.T. Barnum of his style of professional wrestling. But in 1982, 1983, 1984, he wasn't that. I mean, before 1982, how often would any of the other territories deal with Vince McMahon Jr. when they did business with the New York office? Not that much. I mean, unless somehow someone was booking someone into Cape Cod, which wasn't happening. They really weren't dealing with him. So it wasn't like an established promoter, one of them, one of their club was the one doing this. It was the son of one of them who most people really didn't know that well.
Yes, and I think that was even more of a deeper dig for the knife that was being stabbed into the back of these old promoters to acknowledge that this young man, the son of one of their colleagues, a colleague they had always respected and appreciated, and a man who, Vince McMahon Sr. always brought kind of a wise voice to the NWA table or meetings of promoters. He was a kind of a man everybody respected. To have his son now, just step in and have this incredible idea of what he wanted to do for professional wrestling, and all of them. Now, we're not just talking about a few of these promoters having to deal with this. We're talking about all of them are being affected by him, a little at a time, but eventually all of them were all being affected by him at the same time. And, I feel like these promoters, they were helpless in a lot of ways. They kept, with Pro Wrestling USA and these other, ideas that they had to kind of combat McMahon, they were just at a complete and total loss. And McMahon was doing what he wanted to do based on his vision. And like I said, him being a junior and him being this young guy who, wasn't a part of their clique to kind of be doing this, I think it just really pissed these promoters off all the more.
What do you think are some of the biggest unanswered questions from this period of time? If we look specifically at the 1980s, what are some of the questions we still don't have answers for?
Wow. I mean, honestly, it goes up and down history for me. I mean, I wish more of these promoters would have written autobiographies. I wish Verne Gagne would have told this story. I just kind of wish we would have ever gotten just a detailed perspective of how they were dealing with this, how they were feeling, what they felt as some of these major things were happening. And I think, we sit here and we talk about, Verne Gagne was, just seeing his world crumble and watching the AWA collapse. But what really was he thinking? Did he always have a positive attitude? I mean, was he depressed? And we look at up and down the line, Bob Geiger in Kansas City, at the point when he realized, he was going out of business, what was he really thinking? Were there things that he could have done differently? Up and down the line. And, going back through history, I've come to this conclusion multiple times, looking at the decline of Fred Kohler in Chicago and even Jim Barnett, his ups and downs throughout history. I mean, had these men written autobiographies or told their story in any detail, we would know what really was happening. So here we are as historians or, researchers or fans, and, we're looking at all of the available information and reading books and absorbing everything we can. And we're lucky to have, Ron Fuller and some of these other gentlemen out there today and Jim Cornette to tell us, inside information. But I feel like in a lot of ways, we lost a massive piece of history with a lot of these guys going to their graves without telling their stories.
I guess that's one of the reasons why the Jack Pfeffer archive is so fascinating. And I haven't ever been able to go over there, but I know some people who have. It just seems like he saved everything.
Yeah, and I had the privilege of going there back in 2005, and I'd love to go back. I mean, it's just a wonderful, just an archive of history that we can go in and just see how these wrestlers and promoters, they corresponded with each other, and, how did they spoke and what their dealings were, and, financial records, and just, everything he collected. It's just a wonderful, if anybody gets a chance, anybody that's seriously interested in the history of wrestling just has to go to the University of Notre Dame and check out the Pfeffer collection, because it is just it's a godsend for any real fans of professional wrestling.
I do research for 605. The research you do blows my research away, I have a feeling, Tim. Let me ask you something.
Well, thank you.
I've said it on the show. I've said that I think this is the golden age of wrestling research. What do you think?
You're absolutely right. And, I've actually thought about this before. I think within the last 10 to 15 years, how far we've come in professional wrestling history, and just how far, historians and researchers have come in telling various points of history. I can remember, 10, 15 years ago when, we didn't know anything about, the Department of Justice investigation. And then Chokehold came out and opened up that kind of door. And then, that really was an eye opener for me particularly. And that only fueled my fire to kind of not only, see that documentation, but build upon that. And I was able to create the NWA book. And I just feel like so many, questions have been answered over the last 10, 15 years with, better documentation and, just stuff that's just been found, and family sharing information. It really is a golden age. And it's just amazing how far we've come in such a short period of time.
Chokehold is a fascinating book because you have that dichotomy of the first wrestling book with truly extraordinary research versus a somewhat outlandish and at times discredited story of Jim Wilson and his fumbles in and around the professional wrestling business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you, getting into that book, there's such a, like you said, this mixed match of information where you have the story of Jim Wilson, where he talks about, his career and, his relations with Jim Barnett, the promise that, he'll, be NWA champion, all of that balanced against this tremendous history of the NWA, of the Department of Justice investigation, antitrust violations, court cases. I mean, it's just an unbelievable. Weldon Johnson did an unbelievable job. He kind of opened the door, like I said, for other researchers to follow in that kind of, those footsteps kind of, to find that information and to build upon it and share it with readers and interested fans. So, that's a wonderful book. You just have to kind of walk a tightrope between, the story of Jim Wilson and this tremendous history.
The book is Death of the Territories, Expansion, Betrayal, and the War That Changed Pro Wrestling Forever by Tim Hornbaker from our good friends at ECW Press. I want to thank them. They're good people over there. Tim, before we go, this book obviously gets the highest possible recommendation from me. I think this is an important historical book. I'm glad someone decided to tackle this era because it's very important, especially now, because we do have the opportunity, unlike doing research for the 40s and 50s, to really get a lot of firsthand conversations with people. So we really need to get the ball rolling on capturing as much as we can from this period of time. Like I said, highest possible recommendation, Death of the Territories. Will wrestling fans be hearing from you again in the future?
I just want to say thank you, Brian. Absolutely. I'm currently working on a new book project that I'm very excited about. I'll have information about this in the near future, but I just want to tell you thank you again for your kindness of having me on. It's been a real honor. I love your work. I love your show. And I hope readers will give this book a chance and appreciate everything that I kind of put into it and just learn about a wonderful time in history. And thank you again, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Boom! There it is. Wrestling historian Tim Hornbaker, author of Book of the Week, Death of the Territories. We recommend everyone get this book. The highest possible recommendation from the Super Podcast. You can get it at tinyurl.com/superpod. Amazon. Kurt, you have been tremendous again. Last minute, filling in the co-host chair. You will be back on very, very soon. I think we may have to have book reviews by the reincarnated Jerry Graham in the top 10 at some point. I don't know. We'll see.
Got a lot of reading to do up there in the skies.
Is that how it works? What do you want to say here at the end of the show? Anything to the 605ers? Anything you want to plug?
Well, let's see. I would like to point you out, of course, as always, I want to point you out to luchaworld.com. Alfredo Esparza, one of the best lucha historians ever, has a lot of good items up there, including the Lucha World podcast. Also, I started a page called the Pulpo Pages of Pro Wrestling. Pulpo spelled Pulpo. And that's Spanish for octopus. It's a show I have dedicated to journeymen. And the one who sparked the idea was the California and Southwestern journeyman of the 30s and 40s, Jimmy El Pulpo. So please check it out on Facebook.
Let me know if you find out any information about Gordo Chihuahua. We're still looking for more.
I will do that. I will look.
Yeah, my dad actually recently asked me. He goes, "You hear any more about Gordo Chihuahua?" I said, "No, Dad. No one's heard of Gordo Chihuahua."
Oh, as soon as we get the desktop up, I will search for him. I'm still searching for any evidence of somebody existing named Ace Womack that Dr. Jerry Graham told me about. That's cocksucker Reed. I even brought an Ace Womack for his shows, and he didn't show me any consideration.
Ace Womack. I've never heard that name before.
Oh, man, so tough. Vince McMahon paid him $50,000 a year not to wrestle.
Well, as we wrap things up here, a few notes here. Of course, you can keep in touch with the show on Twitter at 605pod. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last, and you can follow the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network on Twitter at Superpodcasts. You can follow the Super Podcast on Facebook, facebook.com/Superpodcast, the central hub for all Super Podcast social media, facebook.com/Superpodcast. If you would like to support this show on Amazon, you can use tinyurl.com/superpod. Amazon for all your purchases. You don't do anything differently than you would normally do. You don't spend any more than you would normally spend, but you support this show. tinyurl.com/superpod. Amazon, other shows have links. Fuck those guys. Support the Super Podcast. Of course, you could also support the Super Podcast by wearing a t-shirt. We have Super Podcast logo t-shirts, Mothership logo t-shirts. We still have some Yo Mamba 605 t-shirts, as well as bumper stickers, other kinds of stickers, magnets, and much more. You can get all the official Super Podcast gear at tinyurl.com/superpodstore. And you could also click the link that says shop here at the top of facebook.com/superpodcast. If you appreciate this show, if you enjoy this show and everything that goes into it, and appreciate that we don't have tons and tons of ads all over the place, beating you over the fucking head with shit that you really don't want or need, quite frankly, well, then you can support this show financially. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, hey, we'd appreciate it. You can make a one-time donation at paypal.me/superpodcast, or you can make an ongoing monthly donation at patreon.com/superpodcast. Thank you very much to everyone who has been supporting this show. Thank you to all the patrons. I think you all know recently how much I do appreciate everything you've done in supporting this show. Thank you to all the secret millionaires out there. I haven't mentioned you in a while, but we really do appreciate you supporting the Super Podcast. Of course, you can find the 605 Super Podcast on iTunes. If you enjoy it, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It really does help the show out. If you don't like iTunes, you can access every single episode of the Super Podcast as well as our RSS feed directly at 605pod.com. This episode of the 605 Super Podcast was sponsored by Ramsor Records, RAMSEUR, Ramsor Records. Don't forget Samantha Crane on tour. Check her out when she comes to your town. We want to invite you to check out the other fine shows on the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Of course, the newest one, The Non-Fans Guide to Wrestling. 3 British fans, or non-fans, I should say, sit down and watch wrestling, past and present, discussing the most ridiculous things in wrestling history. You can get that at nonfanpod.com or search for the Non-Fans Guide to Wrestling on iTunes, wherever you find your favorite podcast. Of course, Travis Bowden's Kentucky Fried Wrestling, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdrin and Barry, Ron Fuller's Studcast, and Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam and Sean Goodwin, all available wherever you find your favorite podcasts, all a part of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. If you want to send anything into the Super Podcast, you can do so. Send it to the 605 Super Podcast, P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962. That's the 605 Super Podcast, the Mothership, P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962. The 605 Super Podcast is a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network for Vandal Drummond. I'm the great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
What about I got one for you. How about this?
That's not my dad!
I got one for you. How about this one, okay? Check this out.
You have a soundbite?
Don't call, or your wig might fall off.
Wait, play that again, please.
Oh, one more time.
Hey, girl! Don't call, or your wig might fall off.
Hold on. Who is that? And what do they say? Are they saying, hey, girl, don't fall, your wig might fall off?
I'll play it one more time, and then I'll interpret. This is a man named Lorenzo Holden. Okay. Lorenzo Holden.
Hey, girl! Don't cough, or your wig might fall off.
Don't cough, or your wig might fall off.
Hey, girl, don't cough, or your wig might fall off.
What? He's a singer?
Yeah. He has an instrumental single, a fairly obscure one called "The Wig" on CJM Records. And this is, if I'm looking at the record label here, instrumental number 1. And this is the plug side for you people in the radio industry. This was the pick hit, "The Wig." So it's almost completely an instrumental, except for the introduction where I assume it's Lorenzo Holden saying, one more time,
hey, girl, don't cough, or your wig might fall off.
That's a good intro. Here's one I like better.
Hello, Lucille. Are you a lesbian? Do you like to go to bed with women?
Yeah.
Come on, Lucille. Right now.
For those of you who don't know, that's T. Valentine, Hello Lucille, Are You a Lesbian? A classic song for a number of reasons. One is it's awful, but it's great. The second is what a twist the song has. He's calling up Lucille, who he wants to be with, but she's a lesbian. Right. But then it turns out his sister is a lesbian.
Yes. You lesbian.
Hold on, let me play some of this.
On answer calls. When I try to kiss her, she said she got a cold. When I want to make love, she got female trouble. Or that other thing that women have every month.
Hold on. She's got female trouble or that other thing that... What's the other thing? What's the what the fuck is he talking about?
Maybe he explains it a little further along. No, as I recall, he doesn't explain it anything.
She always wear pants, long pants. I never seen on your dress a skirt. When we go out, it's like two men out together. She wears her haircut short like mine. She don't have any tits. She don't wear makeup and high heels.
It just goes right off the cliff.
Yeah.
She don't have any tits. She don't wear makeup. Why is he dating her? But if I fast forward, hold on.
And they're laughing and whispering out, why don't he take her out? I hate all lesbians. I hate all lesbians.
Similar time back that was recorded.
Well, let me get to the end so you can hear the big twist. By the way, thank you, Norton Records. Let me say that, give them a plug before we continue. This is from Norton Records, a record label I have always supported, and I know Scott does too. Check this out. Free plug to them.
I want a woman, all woman. And from now on, when I take a woman out, waste time. I'm going to find out if she a woman. And we men know how that's done. All I want to see or hear a lesbian. Cause my sister is a lesbian.
What a twist there at the end. You know, one of the coolest things, and this is so off topic, but years ago, you got me and my cousin Alex into CT Valentine when he came up to New York and performed these songs that were somehow discovered by Miriam Lina and Billy Miller at Norton Records. And he played the,
Friars Club.
He played the Friars Club, and you got us in there to see it, and it was such an interesting event, but I'll never forget the way he introduced the song. He goes, "Are you ready for the hit? Do you want the hit?" The hit.
That's right.
The hit.
Well, believe me, everyone in that room was ready for the hit and recognized Hello, Lucille, Are You Lesbian as the hit. Yeah, it inexplicable all the way along the line. And it relates to wrestling, and certainly wrestling fans love to find these really off the wall, hard to remember angles or wrestlers or just things that come out of nowhere that just blow your mind. So it's completely crazy that he was out there sincerely doing these records. I don't even think trying to be funny, over, from the late 60s into the early 70s every so often.
Oh, longer than that, because when is this one from? All right, well, that's all the T. Valentine we'll be playing today here on the show.
T. Valentine, but it's just so crazy that, he did stuff in the 50s or 60s, then the 70s, then the crazy Lucille record, and then 30 years after that, somehow we see him in the Friars Club. Sometimes you just have to sit there and go, is this really happening?
And he wore a cape like Dracula.
Yeah, because he had written a play called The Vampire. So the presentation was some sort of multimedia thing where my friend's great band Daddy Longlegs backed him musically, and then all kinds of people, including Miriam and Howie Pyro and the great crazy painter Joe Coleman, all took part. It was a sort of multimedia thing. It was if we haven't lost everybody entirely from our audience right now, it was a play called The Vampire, where he played the vampire, They had dancing girls that were the vampires' victims. Meanwhile, Daddy Longlegs is playing this raw blues music behind him. Every so often during the middle of the play, he would sing Betty Sue or Hello, Lucille, or his hit, or what have you. There was a lot of smoke in the room, as I recall. Completely surreal and a very memorable, strange event in wrestling history.
Hello, Lucille. Are you a lesbian? Do you like to go to bed with women? I'm gonna call Lucille.
All right.
It'd be great if you could do one of those old-fashioned Dick Clark reviews, and you'd have T. Valentine and then Lorenzo Holden would come out and do this.
Hey, girl! Don't talk, or your wig might fall off.
Here comes the song.